Cole Rourke built his ranch with blood and silence. No family, no softness, no second chances. But when the mining company came for his water, they brought something worse. A threat wrapped in expensive boots and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The man's name was Vance Crowell, and he wanted two things, Cole's Creek and the woman standing in Cole's kitchen. The moment 5-year-old Daisy saw Vance through the window, she stopped breathing. And Cole Rourke, who swore he'd never fight for anything but land, realized some battles aren't about property at all. If you're ready for a story about courage, found family, and the kind of love that rewrites the rules of the frontier, stay with me until the end. And when you're done, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Wyoming wind came hard across the open range that October morning in 1878, carrying the smell of sage and the promise of early snow. Cole Rourke stood on the porch of the main house at Red Hollow Ranch, coffee cooling in his hand, watching the dust trail from an approaching wagon. He wasn't expecting company. He never expected company. "That'll be your cook," Barnett called from the barn, wiping axle grease on his pants. The old ranch hand grinned, showing the gap where he'd lost a tooth to a spooked mare 3 summers back. Town said they'd send someone reliable. Cole didn't answer. He'd learned young that reliability was a myth people sold themselves to sleep better at night. His father had been reliable, reliably drunk, reliably violent, reliably convinced that loving his wife made him weak. When she died bringing Cole's stillborn sister into the world, his father had proven himself reliably determined to follow her into the ground, one bottle at a time. Cole had buried him at 16 and sworn 2 things. He'd build a ranch that would outlast any man's memory, and he'd never let sentiment compromise survival. Red Hollow Ranch was the proof. 4 years of work, buying cattle when nobody else would risk it, pushing through winters that killed weaker operations, hiring only men too desperate or too stubborn to quit. The ranch ran clean and hard, 2,000 acres of grazing land cut by the sweetest creek water in the territory. No waste, no weakness, no room for anything soft, except the men were threatening mutiny over the food. "I ain't saying I can't eat boot leather," Jack Reeves had announced 2 weeks ago, pushing his plate away with a look of profound betrayal. "I'm saying I shouldn't have to when we're paying a cook to poison us proper." The others had nodded agreement. Even Barnett, loyal as an old dog, had cleared his throat diplomatically. "Boss, Hendricks burns water. We're losing weight and winter's coming." So Cole had sent word to Clearwater, the mining town 15 miles east, figuring somebody there would know a widow or a desperate man who could manage beans and bacon without setting the cookhouse on fire. The answer had come back fast. Lila Hart. Experienced. Available immediately. Comes with references and a daughter. The daughter part had given him pause, but beggars couldn't afford preferences. If the woman could cook and keep her child out of the way, Cole would tolerate the arrangement. Children were temporary inconveniences. They grew up, they left. That's what they did. The wagon pulled into the yard, driven by a grizzled freighter Cole recognized from supply runs. But it wasn't the driver that caught his attention. The woman who climbed down moved with the kind of deliberate grace that came from carrying weight without showing the strain. She was younger than Cole expected, maybe 25, with dark hair pinned severely back and a face that might have been pretty if it wasn't so carefully blank. She wore a simple gray dress that had seen better years but was meticulously clean, and she carried herself like someone who'd learned early that posture was armor. Then she turned and lifted a child down from the wagon bed. The girl was tiny, maybe 5 years old, with pale blonde hair and enormous blue eyes that took in the ranch with the kind of wariness Cole recognized. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She just pressed close to the woman's skirt and watched everything like she was memorizing escape routes. "Mr. Rourke?" The woman's voice was steady, educated, not what he'd expected from a mining town cook. "I'm Lila Hart. This is Daisy." Cole descended the porch steps, aware of his crew gathering at a respectful distance, curious and hopeful. "Miss Hart, you come recommended." "I know my work." No false modesty, no apology for the child, just fact. "Cookhouse is that building." Cole gestured to the low structure 50 yards from the main house. "Meals for 6 men, 3 times daily. Pantries stocked through winter. You'll have Sundays after breakfast to yourself. Rooms attached to the cookhouse, private, with a good stove. Lila's gaze followed his gesture, and something flickered across her face. Relief, maybe, though she controlled it fast. I'll need to see the kitchen before I agree to terms. Cole blinked. In 4 years, no one had negotiated with him about anything. Terms are room, board, and $30 monthly. The terms are acceptable if the kitchen is functional. Lila's eyes met his without flinching. I don't work in filth, and I don't make promises I can't keep. Behind him, Cole heard Barnett's quiet chuckle. The old man was enjoying this entirely too much. Fine, Cole started toward the cookhouse, not waiting to see if she'd follow. But if you're particular, you should know the last cook wasn't. That was generous. Hendricks had treated the kitchen like a battlefield and lost every engagement. Cole pushed open the cookhouse door and stepped aside. Lila walked in, Daisy still clinging to her skirt. The silence stretched out. Cole watched her take inventory. The grease-film stove, the table covered in dubious stains, the dishes piled in a tin basin with water that had gone gray days ago, the floor that crunched with spilled cornmeal and coffee grounds. How long since this room was properly cleaned? Lila's voice was carefully neutral. Hendricks left 3 weeks ago. And before that? Cole considered lying, then decided against it. Something about this woman suggested she'd know. He wasn't strong on maintenance. Lila walked to the stove, tested the flue, examined the water pump, opened the pantry. Daisy shadowed her every step, silent as morning fog. Finally, Lila turned back to Cole. I'll take the position, but I'll need this afternoon to make the kitchen operational. Supper will be at 6. It won't be elaborate, but it will be edible and served hot. You're going to clean all this in one afternoon? Cole couldn't keep the skepticism out of his voice. I've managed worse. Lila was already untying her bonnet. Daisy and I will need our belongings brought to the room. And I'll require cleaning supplies, lye soap, vinegar, rags, a decent scrub brush, and fresh water. Lots of it. Cole found himself nodding before he'd consciously agreed. Barnett can bring your things. I'll have Jack set up the water. Thank you. Lila was already rolling up her sleeves, revealing forearms marked with old burn scars, the kind cooks accumulated over years of working close to fire and iron. We'll manage from here. It was a dismissal, a polite one, but unmistakable. Cole, who gave orders on his own land and expected them followed without question, found himself backing toward the door like a schoolboy excused from lessons. 6 o'clock, Lila repeated, already moving toward the stove with the focused intensity of a general surveying a battlefield. Cole stepped outside and nearly collided with his entire crew, who'd been pretending not to eavesdrop while obviously hanging on every word. Well, Jack Reeves demanded. She's staying. She's staying, Cole's voice came out rougher than intended. And she's claimed the cookhouse for the afternoon. Stay clear unless you want to be conscripted into cleaning duty. She gonna cook tonight? This from Tommy Chen, the youngest hand who'd been raised on his mother's dumplings and suffered Hendricks's attempts at food with visible anguish. She says 6 o'clock. The men exchanged looks of cautious optimism. Barnett, grinning openly now, headed for the wagon to fetch the Hart women's belongings. Cole returned to the main house, telling himself he had account books that needed attention and fence lines that wanted checking. He did neither. Instead, he found himself watching from the window as Lila Hart transformed his cookhouse from disaster to something approaching civilization. She worked with ruthless efficiency. First, the stove. She had it emptied, scraped, and reseasoned within an hour, working through the smoke and heat without pause. Daisy sat on a clean patch of floor, staying quiet and small, occasionally handing her mother a tool or rag with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this many times before. Then the table, scrubbed down to bare wood with the kind of violence that suggested Lila had opinions about filth. The dishes next, washed in water she heated in batches, dried and stacked with precise care. The floor came last, swept and mopped until the boards showed their original color. By 4 o'clock, the cookhouse looked like a different building. Lila had even hung curtains, simple flour sack fabric, but clean and hemmed, in the small window. Through the open door, Cole could see her moving around the stove, and the smell that drifted across the yard made his stomach clench with something uncomfortably close to hunger. At 6 o'clock exactly, Barnett rang the dinner bell. The crew came fast, boots scraping on the cookhouse steps, trying not to look too eager and failing completely. Cole followed, telling himself he was just maintaining standards, making sure the new hire could actually deliver. The table had been set with tin plates and actual napkins. Where had she found napkins? The stove radiated steady heat, and the smell that filled the room was enough to stop conversation mid-breath. Lila stood at the stove, Daisy beside her with a basket of biscuits. The child's eyes were still wary, but she wasn't quite as pressed into her mother's side. Small progress. "Gentlemen?" Lila's voice was calm, professional. "Supper is beef stew with root vegetables, sourdough biscuits, and apple butter. Please be seated." The men scrambled for chairs like they'd been starved for weeks, which, Cole reflected, wasn't far from truth. Lila served with the same efficient grace she'd brought to cleaning, moving around the table with a heavy pot, ladling stew into plates while Daisy followed with the biscuit basket. Cole took the first bite and understood immediately why the men had gone silent. The stew was perfect, meat tender enough to fall apart, vegetables cooked through but not mushy, broth rich with herbs and pepper. The biscuits were golden, flaky, buttered while still hot. After 3 weeks of Hendrix's crimes against food and another week of cold rations, it tasted like resurrection. "Miss Hart," Barnett's voice was reverent, "this is exceptional." "It's adequate." But Lila's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close. "I'll do better once I know the pantry properly." Jack Reeves, who'd been shoveling stew like a man racing against time, looked up with desperate eyes. "You're not leaving, are you? Tell me you're not leaving." "I've only just arrived, Mr. Reeves." "Stay forever," Tommy Chen said, around a mouthful of biscuit. "Please, I'll do anything. I'll clean the barn every day. Tommy. Cole's voice was quiet, but carried weight. Let the woman breathe. But he understood the sentiment. This wasn't just good food. This was care made tangible. The kind of attention to detail and simple competence that turned a building into something warmer. The cookhouse had been a place to endure. In one afternoon, Lila Hart had made it a place to gather. Daisy, he noticed, ate nothing. She sat in the corner on a small stool, watching the men with those two old eyes, her hands folded in her lap. When Lila brought her a small plate, the child took it, but only picked at the food, pushing vegetables around without actually eating. The men noticed too. They tried, making their voices softer, their movements less abrupt, offering smiles that Daisy didn't return. She just watched, silent and still, like a rabbit deciding whether to bolt. After supper, the crew filed out with mumbled thanks and backward glances, already dreading the return to Hendrix's memory. Cole lingered, ostensibly to discuss supply schedules, actually, because he couldn't quite articulate why he wanted to stay. Lila was already cleaning, moving through the post-meal chaos with the same systematic approach she'd brought to everything else. Daisy helped, carrying plates that looked too heavy for her small hands, but managing anyway. The men appreciated the meal, Cole said finally, feeling awkward in a way he hadn't felt since adolescence. The men were hungry. Lila didn't stop working. Hunger makes everything taste better. It was more than that. Now she did pause, looking at him directly. In the lamplight, her face showed the fatigue she'd been hiding, shadows under her eyes, tension in her jaw. "Mr. Rourke, if you're concerned about whether I can maintain this standard, I can. If you're concerned about Daisy being underfoot, she won't be. If you're concerned about—" "I'm not concerned," Cole interrupted, then realized it was true. Whatever else Lila Hart might be, she was competent, capable, the kind of person who kept promises. "I wanted to say the arrangement is satisfactory." Something in her shoulders loosened slightly. "Thank you." "Daisy doesn't eat much," Cole observed, then cursed himself for the intrusion. Lila's expression shuddered immediately. "She eats enough." "I wasn't criticizing, I was—" "What? Concerned about a child he'd known for 6 hours? That made no sense. Cole changed direction. "There's a root cellar behind the cookhouse. Anything you need that's not in the pantry, make a list. We run supplies from Clearwater monthly. Next trip is in 2 weeks." "I'll manage until then." Lila returned to her dishes, conversation clearly finished. Cole left, stepping into the October darkness with more questions than he'd arrived with. He'd hired a cook, that was all. The fact that she'd transformed his cookhouse in an afternoon meant she was good at her job. The fact that her daughter barely spoke meant nothing to him. The fact that he was already anticipating breakfast meant he was simply tired of bad food. He almost believed it. The first week passed in a rhythm Cole hadn't realized he'd been missing. Lila proved herself relentlessly competent. Breakfast arrived at 6. Eggs, bacon, flapjacks, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Lunch came at noon. Sandwiches for the men working distant fence lines. Hot soup for those near the ranch. Supper appeared at 6 with the reliability of sunset. Roasted meat, vegetables that actually had flavor, bread that made Tommy Chen close his eyes, and something approaching prayer. The cookhouse became the center of ranch life in ways the bunkhouse never had. The men started arriving early, helping Lila haul water or chop vegetables, telling stories that made her mouth curve in that almost smile. They gentled themselves around Daisy, keeping their language clean, their movements careful, trying to coax the silent child into feeling safe. Daisy began to thaw, but slowly. By the 4th day, she'd started responding to direct questions with nods or headshakes. By the 6th day, she had whispered thank you when Barnett carved her a small wooden horse. By the end of the first week, she was helping her mother more actively, still quiet, but less frozen. Cole watched it happen from a distance he told himself was professional. He had a ranch to run, cattle to move, hay to secure before the snow came, account books that wouldn't balance themselves. He didn't have time to notice how Lila hummed while she worked, or how Daisy's eyes followed the horses with cautious longing, or how the cookhouse light burning late into the evening made the whole ranch feel less empty. Except he did notice. All of it. "You're staring again," Barnett observed one evening as they mended tack in the barn. "I'm not staring, I'm observing." "Right, and I'm the Queen of England." Barnett tested a repaired bridle, satisfied with the work. "She's good for this place, boss. Good for the men. Even good for you, though you'd choke before admitting it." "I admitted she's a competent cook. You watch that cookhouse like a man watching his life change and trying to decide if he's scared or grateful." Barnett's voice was gentle, knowing. "Ain't no shame in either." Cole drove an all-through leather with more force than necessary. "I hired help, that's all." "Keep telling yourself that." Barnett gathered the finished tack, heading for the door. "Just don't tell yourself so long you miss what's right in front of you." That night, Cole stood on his porch after supper, coffee in hand, watching Lila move around the cookhouse through the window. She was teaching Daisy something, how to knead dough, maybe, their heads bent together over the work table, Lila's hands guiding the child's smaller ones through the motion. It looked like peace. It looked like home. It looked like everything Cole had deliberately avoided building because he'd watched love destroy his father and sworn he'd never be that weak. But standing there in the October darkness, watching lamplight pool golden on the cookhouse floor, while Lila and Daisy worked together in silent harmony, Cole felt something shift in his chest, something that felt dangerously close to want. He drained his coffee and went inside, closing the door firmly on the sight. Some weaknesses, he told himself, you couldn't afford to indulge. Oops. The lawyer arrived on a Tuesday morning in late October, stepping down from a hired carriage with the careful precision of a man who'd never touched honest dirt in his life. Cole was in the north pasture checking fence lines when Barnett rode up fast, horse breathing hard. "Boss, you got company." "Who?" "City lawyer, expensive suit, says it's urgent regarding Red Hollow's water rights." Barnett's expression was grim. "He's waiting in the yard, looking at everything like he's calculating what it's worth." Cole felt ice settle in his gut. "Get Jack and Tommy. Have them stay visible but not threatening. I'll be there in 10 minutes. By the time Cole rode into the yard, the lawyer had made himself comfortable on the porch, Cole's porch, with a leather satchel and the kind of confidence that came from having power backed by money. "Mr. Rourke," the man stood, extending a hand. "Silas Pemberton, representing Crowell Mining Consolidated. Thank you for seeing me." Cole ignored the hand. "I don't recall agreeing to see you. I recall you being on my property uninvited." Pemberton's smile didn't waver. "My apologies for the intrusion. However, the matter I'm here to discuss affects both your interests and those of my client. I thought a private conversation would be preferable to more formal proceedings." "Say what you came to say." "Very well." Pemberton opened his satchel, removing documents. Crowell Mining has recently acquired significant claims in the Clearwater Range. Our surveys indicate that optimal operations require access to the creek that runs through your property, specifically the water rights you currently hold. Cole's voice stayed level. My creek isn't for sale. I understand that may be your initial position. However, Pemberton produced another document, this one thick with legal language and official seals. Our research indicates some ambiguity regarding the original territorial survey. There's precedent suggesting that water rights in this region may be subject to reallocation based on industrial necessity and public benefit. There's no ambiguity. I hold clear title to Red Hollow and all associated water rights. The territorial office confirmed it when I filed. Yes, well, Pemberton's smile sharpened slightly. Title claims from that period are often imperfectly documented. Crowell Mining is prepared to offer generous compensation for voluntary cooperation, $50,000 for perpetual water access, with guarantees that your cattle operations won't be disrupted. The number was enormous, more than the entire ranch was worth, which meant they needed his water badly, which meant they were willing to destroy him to get it. No. Cole kept his voice flat, emotionless. Get off my land. Mr. Rourke, I urge you to consider what I've considered. Answers no. You've got 30 seconds to be off my property before I decide you're trespassing and handle it accordingly. Pemberton's pleasant expression finally cracked, revealing something colder underneath. You're making a mistake. Crowell Mining has significant resources and influence. If voluntary cooperation isn't possible, we're prepared to pursue legal remedies. I assure you, the courts tend to favor industrial development over individual homesteads. 20 seconds. The lawyer gathered his documents with deliberate slowness, making a show of his unconcern. You'll be hearing from us again, Mr. Rourke, and next time the terms will be considerably less favorable. He climbed into his carriage and departed, leaving Cole standing in the yard with rage burning through his veins and the cold understanding that his fight for Red Hollow had just become something much bigger than drought or hard winters. Boss? Jack approached cautiously. What do you need? I need the property survey from the territorial office. I need every document related to my water rights, and I need to know everything about Crowell Mining Consolidated, who runs it, what they want, and how dirty they're willing to fight. On it. Jack headed for the barn at a run. Cole stood alone in the yard, watching dust settle where the carriage had been, feeling the weight of the threat like stones in his pockets. He'd built Red Hollow from nothing. 4 years of brutal work, betting everything on this land, this water, this dream of something that would outlast him. And now men in expensive suits wanted to take it with legal papers and manufactured ambiguity, crushing him like he was nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle to profit. Behind him, the cookhouse door opened. Cole turned to find Lila standing there, Daisy pressed against her side, both of them watching him with identical expressions of carefully controlled fear. I heard, Lila said quietly. Crowell Mining. You know them? Something dark moved behind her eyes. Everyone in Clearwater knows Crowell Mining. They own half the town. The other half they're working on. This lawyer, Pemberton, works for Vance Crowell directly, the superintendent. Lila's hands tightened on Daisy's shoulders. He's not a man who accepts no as an answer. The way she said it, the weight of personal knowledge in her voice, made Cole's chest tighten with questions he had no right to ask. But before he could speak, Daisy made a sound, small, frightened, barely audible. The child was staring past Cole toward the road, her face drained of color, her breathing shallow and quick. She'd gone rigid under her mother's hands, every muscle locked with terror. Lila knelt immediately, turning Daisy to face her, blocking the child's view of the road. Daisy, look at me. You're safe. Do you understand? You're safe here. But Daisy wasn't looking at her mother. The girl's gaze had fixed on something only she could see, some memory that had risen with the mention of Vance Crowell's name and wouldn't be dismissed. And Cole Rourke, who'd sworn he'd never fight for anything but land, realized with sudden, absolute certainty that whatever Crowell Mining wanted, whatever threats they brought, whatever force they could muster, they'd have to go through him first, because the woman and child standing in front of his cookhouse weren't just employees anymore. They were under his protection. And that changed everything. The silence that followed was broken only by Daisy's ragged breathing and the distant sound of cattle settling in the north pasture. Cole watched Lila hold her daughter, murmuring words too soft for him to catch, and felt something fundamental shift in the architecture of his carefully constructed solitude. "Get her inside," he said quietly. "Both of you. I'll handle this." Lila looked up at him, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he saw past the competent facade to the fear underneath. "Mr. Rourke, you don't understand what Crowell—" "Then help me understand." Cole kept his voice steady, gentle in a way that felt foreign to his own ears. "But not here. Not while she's scared." Lila nodded once, then gathered Daisy into her arms and carried the child toward the cookhouse. The girl had gone limp, not fighting, just trembling like cottonwood leaves before a storm. Cole waited until they disappeared inside, before turning back to the yard where Barnett stood watching. "Whatever's coming," the old ranch hand said. "It's bigger than water rights." "I know." "You gonna tell me what you're planning?" Cole looked toward the cookhouse, where lamplight already glowed warm against the gathering dusk. "I'm planning to keep what's mine, and I'm planning to make sure nothing touches those two." Barnett's weathered face creased with something that might have been approval or concern or both. "That's a tall order when you're fighting mining money." "Then I'd better get good at tall orders." The next morning came cold and clear, frost painting the paddock fence white and breath misting in the pre-dawn darkness. Cole was already in the barn when Lila appeared, wrapped in a shawl that had seen better years, her face drawn with exhaustion that spoke of a sleepless night. "Daisy?" he asked. "Still sleeping. Finally." Lila's voice was rough with fatigue. "She had nightmares, 3 of them. She hasn't had nightmares in weeks." Cole set down the bridle he'd been mending. "Tell me about Vance Crowell." Lila was quiet for so long he thought she might refuse. Then she spoke, each word chosen with the care of someone navigating a minefield. "My father owns a boarding house in Clearwater. Small place. 8 rooms, clean beds, decent meals. It's been in our family for 20 years. When the mining operations expanded, Crowell decided the location was valuable. He made an offer. My father declined. Let me guess. Crowell didn't take it well. He started with pressure. Suddenly we couldn't get supplies delivered. Our regular customers received better offers elsewhere. Small accidents started happening, broken windows, contaminated well water, a fire in the storage shed that the sheriff called unfortunate but not suspicious. Lila's hands twisted in her shawl. Then Crowell changed tactics. He decided the property wasn't the only thing he wanted. Cole felt ice slide down his spine. You. He called it courtship, sent flowers, hired musicians to play outside our windows, showed up at church with gifts for Daisy. Everyone in Clearwater thought it was romantic, the wealthy superintendent pursuing the poor boarding house keeper's daughter. They thought I should be grateful. Her voice went flat, dead. I told him no. Politely at first, then less politely. He didn't care. Men like Vance Crowell don't hear no. They hear, convince me harder. So you left. I ran. The admission came out raw, honest. When I heard about your position, I took it, packed everything we could carry, left my father to manage the boarding house alone, and ran like a coward because staying meant— She stopped, breathing hard. Daisy saw him corner me once, in the storage room behind the kitchen. He didn't touch me that time, just made it very clear what he expected and what would happen to my father's business if I kept refusing. Daisy was 4 years old, hiding behind flour sacks, watching her mother get threatened. She hasn't been right since. Cole absorbed this, fury building in his chest like a slow-burning fire. Your father, is he safe? For now. Crowell has no reason to push harder if I'm not there, and my father's stubborn. He won't sell, won't fold. But if Crowell finds out where I went— Lila met his eyes, and he saw the terrible calculation there. If he knows I'm here, he'll use it. He'll use you, your ranch, your water rights, everything, as leverage to force me back. He can try. Mr. Rourke, you don't understand the kind of power. I understand that he's a bully with money and lawyers. And I understand that bullies count on people being too scared to fight back. Cole's voice was quiet, but carried the weight of absolute certainty. I also understand that you and Daisy aren't going anywhere unless you choose to. This is my land. You're under my roof. That means something. Lila stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. Why would you risk your ranch for people you barely know? It was a fair question. Cole had asked himself the same thing during his own sleepless night, turning the problem over like a puzzle that wouldn't solve. He could give her practical answers, that losing his cook would inconvenience the crew, that he didn't respond well to threats. That principle mattered. All true, but none of it was the whole truth. The whole truth was that he'd watched Lila transform his cookhouse from a place of survival to a place of warmth in a single afternoon. He'd seen Daisy's terror when Crowell's name was mentioned and felt something protective and fierce rise in his chest. He'd spent 4 years building walls against exactly this kind of entanglement, and somehow in 8 days these two had slipped past every defense like water finding cracks in stone. But he couldn't say that, didn't have words for it even if he wanted to try. So instead he said, because it's the right thing to do, and because Red Hollow's worth fighting for, all of it, including the people who make it more than just land and cattle. Lila's eyes shimmered with something that might have been tears, but she blinked them back ruthlessly. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We haven't won anything. Cole straightened, mind already moving through logistics. I need to ride into Clearwater today. Talk to the territorial office, verify my water rights documentation, maybe ask some questions about Crowell's operations. You'll be safe here with the crew. I'm coming with you. That's not... My father needs to know what's happening, and if Crowell's already making moves against your ranch, he might have escalated pressure on the boarding house. I need to check on him. Lila's jaw set with determination that reminded Cole of winter granite. Besides, I know Clearwater. I know which officials are in Crowell's pocket and which ones might still have spines. You need that knowledge. She wasn't wrong. Cole didn't like it. Didn't like the idea of bringing her closer to danger when distance might offer protection. But he also recognized the practical value of her expertise. And underneath that, he understood what she wasn't saying, that sitting at the ranch waiting for news would drive her mad with worry. Daisy comes too, he said finally. I'm not leaving her here if there's any chance Crowell knows where you are. Relief washed over Lila's face. Agreed. We leave in an hour. Dress warm. It'll be a cold ride. They took the wagon rather than horses, Daisy bundled between them in blankets, her small face pinched with cold and anxiety. The girl hadn't spoken since yesterday's episode, retreating into silence like armor. She sat rigid against her mother's side, watching the landscape roll past with eyes that seemed older than her years. Cole drove in silence, letting Lila point out landmarks and offer quiet commentary about the town they approached. Clearwater had grown up around the mines, a sprawl of buildings ranging from shabby to prosperous, depending on how close their owners sat to the mining company's favor. The main street showed the divide clearly. On one side, businesses that thrived on Crowell money, the company's store, the assay office, a hotel too fine for a town this size. On the other, struggling establishments that served the miners themselves, small shops, a church with peeling paint, a Chinese laundry, and toward the end of the street, a modest 2-story building with a sign that read, Hart's Boarding House. The building looked tired but dignified, its paint faded but clean, windows curtained with care, and Cole could see immediately what Lila had meant about accidents. One window was boarded over. The front step showed new lumber where old boards had been replaced. Scorch marks darkened the siding near what must be the storage shed. A man emerged as they pulled up, tall and lean, maybe 50, with Lila's dark eyes and the kind of weathered face that came from decades of hard work and harder choices. He stopped dead when he saw them, relief and concern warring on his features. Lila, thank God. He helped her down, then reached for Daisy, who went to him willingly. I was worried when you didn't write. I'm sorry, Papa. Things got complicated. Lila gestured to Cole. This is Cole Rourke. I'm working at his ranch. Mr. Rourke, my father, Henry Hart. Henry's handshake was firm, assessing. Rourke, heard you've got good land west of here. What brings you to Clearwater? Water rights verification at the territorial office, and some questions about Crowell Mining's operations. Something sharp and knowing moved through Henry's expression. They've come after you too. Lawyer showed up yesterday with an offer and implied threats. That sounds about right. Henry glanced at Lila, then Daisy, making some calculation. You'd better come inside. This conversation shouldn't happen in the street. The boarding house interior was as Lila had described. Modest but meticulously maintained, the kind of place that offered genuine comfort rather than luxury. Henry led them to a private sitting room, settled Daisy with a book and a blanket, then closed the door. How bad has it gotten? Lila asked. Henry sighed, suddenly looking every year of his age. Worse since you left. Crowell came by personally 3 days ago, made another offer, generous on paper, insulting in reality. When I refused, he suggested I might want to reconsider for your sake. Said he'd heard you'd taken employment at some ranch. Said it would be unfortunate if your new employer faced difficulties because of my stubbornness. Cole felt fury spike through his veins. He threatened you through your daughter. He's been threatening me through my daughter for 6 months. This was just more direct about it. Henry turned to Cole. Mr. Rourke, I appreciate whatever employment you've given Lila, but you should know what you're dealing with. Vance Crowell is connected. Territorial officials, judges, sheriffs in 3 counties. He's got money to burn and no conscience about how he burns it. If he wants your water rights badly enough to send lawyers, he'll escalate. And if he finds out Lila's working for you, he'll use her as leverage. I know. Cole kept his voice level. Which is why I need to understand his operation well enough to find weak points. Nobody's unbeatable, Mr. Hart. They just want you to think they are. Henry studied him for a long moment, then something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or hope. The territorial office is 2 blocks north. Ask for Samuel Brennan. He's the land clerk and he's honest. Crowell's tried to buy him twice and failed both times. Sam can verify your documentation and might know about any legal challenges Crowell's planning. And Crowell himself? Usually at the mine headquarters until mid-afternoon, then at the hotel for dinner. If you want to avoid him, stay clear of both. Henry paused. If you want to confront him, the hotel's more public. Witnesses matter with men like that. I'm not planning confrontation today, just reconnaissance. Cole stood. I'll head to the territorial office. Lila, you should stay here with Daisy and your father. No. Lila was already rising. You need me to make introductions. Sam Brennan knows me. He'll talk more freely if I'm there. And if anyone from Crowell's operation sees me, better they see me with you than think I'm hiding. Cole wanted to argue, but she had a point. Besides, he was learning that Lila Hart didn't back down once she'd made a decision. The territorial office occupied a narrow building near the church, its interior crowded with filing cabinets and the musty smell of old paper. Samuel Brennan turned out to be a compact man with ink-stained fingers and the cautious demeanor of someone who'd survived by being scrupulously fair in an unfair environment. His face lit up when he saw Lila. Miss Hart, I'd heard you'd left town. Your father's been worried sick. I'm staying at Mr. Rourke's ranch now. Sam, we need your help. Brennan's expression shifted to professional concern as Cole explained about Pemberton's visit and the implied challenges to his water rights. The clerk listened carefully, then moved to his files with practiced efficiency. Red Hollow Ranch, established 1874, deed filed 1875, water rights verified and recorded. Brennan pulled documents, spreading them on his desk. Everything's in perfect order, Mr. Rourke. Clear title, no ambiguities, no competing claims. If Crowell's lawyers are suggesting otherwise, they're manufacturing problems that don't exist. Can they do that? Challenge clear title through the courts? They can try, file a claim, force you to defend it, drag things out until legal fees bleed you dry. Brennan's voice was grim. It's a tactic Crowell's used before. They don't need to win legally. They just need to make fighting so expensive that you give up. Cole absorbed this, calculating. He had some money saved, but not enough for a prolonged legal battle against mining company resources. How long could they drag it out? Months, maybe years, if they're determined. Brennan hesitated. Mr. Rourke, I shouldn't tell you this, but 3 other ranchers received similar offers in the past year. 2 sold. The 3rd tried to fight and lost his ranch to legal fees before the case even went to trial. Crowell Mining got the water rights for pennies on the dollar at auction. The picture crystallized, brutal, efficient, utterly ruthless. Identify the resource you need, offer money first to seem reasonable, then crush resistance through legal attrition until your target has no choice but to surrender. Clean, legal, devastating. What would it take to actually fight them? Cole asked. Not just survive the legal fees, but win. Brennan looked at him like he'd suggested flying. Evidence of fraud, probably. Proof that their surveys are deliberately falsified, or that they're manipulating the legal system, or that their claims are based on manufactured documentation. But getting that evidence would mean going against Crowell directly, and that's... He stopped. That's not something I'd recommend. What if the evidence already exists? Lila's voice was quiet but sharp. What if we could prove Crowell's been using these tactics deliberately, targeting multiple properties through fraudulent legal pressure? Brennan stared at her. Do you have such evidence? Not yet, but I know how Crowell operates. I know he keeps records. He's proud of his victories, likes to document his conquests. If someone could access those records, that would be illegal. Brennan's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Breaking into mining company offices, stealing documents, that's a crime, Miss Hart. So is extortion. So is using the legal system to defraud property owners. Lila leaned forward. Sam, how many more ranchers is he going to crush before someone stands up to him? Brennan looked between them, conflict written plainly on his face. Finally, he sighed. If such evidence were to appear, hypothetically, from an anonymous source, I'd be obligated to investigate any claims of fraud in territorial land transactions. And if the investigation revealed systematic abuse, I'd have grounds to freeze any pending claims until the matter was resolved. How long would that freeze last? Cole asked. Long enough to make Crowell's investors nervous. Long enough to bring in territorial authorities from outside Crowell's influence. Long enough to maybe, possibly, level the playing field. Brennan gathered the documents, his movements careful. Hypothetically, Cole and Lila left the territorial office with more questions than answers, but also with the ghost of a strategy forming. As they walked back toward the boarding house, Cole noticed Lila scanning the street with habitual wariness. You're looking for him, he said quietly. Always. When you spend months being hunted, the habit doesn't break easily. She pulled her shawl tighter. Crowell likes to make appearances. Remind everyone who runs this town. He'll know I'm here within the hour if he doesn't already. Then maybe we should let him see you're not alone. Lila glanced at him sharply. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that bullies like witnesses and hate surprises. If Crowell knows you've got someone standing with you, someone he can't easily intimidate, Cole let the thought trail off. You want to bait him? I want to establish that you're under protection. There's a difference. They were half a block from the boarding house when Cole saw her freeze, her entire body going rigid. He followed her gaze to the tall man dismounting from a fine bay horse in front of Hart's establishment. Expensive clothes tailored perfectly, dark hair graying at the temples, features that might have been handsome if they weren't arranged in an expression of casual ownership. Vance Crowell had arrived, and he was already walking toward Henry Hart, who stood on the boarding house steps with Daisy visible in the doorway behind him. Cole felt Lila's hand grip his arm, her nails digging through his shirt. He can't see Daisy. Cole, he can't. But Crowell had already spotted them. His attention swung from Henry to Lila with the focused intensity of a predator sighting prey. His smile spread slow and satisfied. Lila. Crowell's voice carried down the street, warm and pleasant and wrong. I've been wondering where you disappeared to. Your father's been terribly worried. Cole felt Lila trembling beside him, fear and rage warring in her rigid posture. He stepped slightly forward, positioning himself between her and Crowell with the deliberate casualness of a man marking territory. Mr. Crowell, Henry's voice from the steps was tight with controlled anger. I was just discussing with my daughter and her employer. Employer? Crowell's gaze finally acknowledged Cole's presence, assessing and dismissing him in the same breath. And who might you be? Cole Rourke, Red Hollow Ranch. Cole kept his voice level, his stance relaxed. Miss Hart is my cook. How fortunate for you. Crowell's smile never wavered, but something cold moved behind his eyes. Though I have to wonder if Red Hollow is the best environment for a woman of Lila's talents. Isolated, rough, so far from civilization and family. Miss Hart seemed satisfied with the arrangement. Does she? Crowell turned his full attention to Lila, and Cole saw her flinch despite her efforts at control. Lila, darling, you left so suddenly, without even a goodbye. I've been concerned. I don't owe you explanations, Mr. Crowell. Lila's voice was stronger than Cole expected, though he could feel her shaking. Or goodbyes. Such formality, after all we've meant to each other. Crowell took a step closer, and Cole mirrored the movement, staying between them. The mining superintendent finally seemed to notice the deliberate interference. Mr. Rourke, is it? I believe we had a conversation through my attorney yesterday. We did. I gave him my answer. Ah, yes. No. Such a definitive word. Crowell's expression shifted, the pleasant mask slipping to reveal calculation underneath. I wonder if you've fully considered the implications of that answer. The territory's growing, Mr. Rourke. Industrial development brings progress, prosperity, jobs. Surely a man of vision can see the benefit in cooperation. I can see the benefit in keeping what's mine. What's yours? Crowell repeated the words like they were fascinating. Interesting concept. I've found that ownership is often more fluid than people realize, especially when circumstances change. The threat hung in the air between them, precise and unmistakable. Cole felt his hands curl into fists and deliberately relaxed them. Are you threatening me, Mr. Crowell? Threatening? Goodness, no. Simply observing that life in the territory can be unpredictable. Accidents happen. Legal complications arise. Sometimes protection becomes necessary. Crowell's gaze slid back to Lila with proprietary satisfaction. For everyone involved. Behind them, Cole heard the boarding house door creak. He didn't turn, but he knew. Daisy had moved into view, and from the way Crowell's attention sharpened, the way his smile widened with recognition, he knew it too. And there she is, little Daisy. Crowell's voice dripped false warmth. Hello, sweetheart. Do you remember me? Daisy made a sound, small, terrified, the noise of a trapped animal. Lila moved instantly, trying to get to her daughter, but Crowell was already walking forward. That's when Cole stepped directly into his path, close enough that the other man had to stop or collide. We're done here, Cole said quietly. Crowell looked at him with genuine surprise, as if a piece of furniture had spoken. Excuse me? You've said your piece, made your position clear. Now you're leaving. I don't think you understand your situation, Mr. Rourke. That child isn't your concern. Cole's voice stayed level, but steel ran through it. Neither is Miss Hart. They're under my protection now, which means whatever game you've been playing in Clearwater ends at my property line. Are we clear? For the first time, genuine anger flickered across Crowell's features. You're making a serious mistake. Probably. I'm good at those. Cole didn't move, didn't break eye contact, but I'm better at standing my ground. So here's how this works. You walk away now, get on your expensive horse, and go back to your mining operations. And you remember that Red Hollow isn't territory you can intimidate. The silence stretched tight and dangerous. Crowell's jaw worked like he was tasting something bitter. Behind Cole, he could hear Lila breathing hard, could sense Henry ready to move, could feel Daisy's terror like a living thing. Finally, Crowell smiled again, this time with nothing but edges. We'll see each other again very soon, Mr. Rourke, I promise you that. He turned to Lila. And Lila, darling, enjoy your little adventure, but remember, there's only so far you can run. He walked to his horse with the unhurried confidence of a man who believed he'd already won, mounted with practiced ease, and rode away without looking back. Cole didn't relax until the hoofbeats faded. Then he turned to find Lila already racing up the steps to Daisy, gathering the child into her arms while Henry hovered nearby, his face gray with concern. The girl was crying silently, tears streaming down her face, her small body shaking with suppressed sobs. Lila held her tight, murmuring reassurances, but Daisy's eyes stayed fixed on the street where Crowell had disappeared, as if she expected him to return any second. Cole mounted the steps slowly, giving them space. Henry met his eyes with an expression of mingled gratitude and worry. That was either very brave or very foolish, the older man said quietly. Probably both. Cole watched Lila rock her daughter, watched the fierce protection in every line of her body, and felt that dangerous warmth in his chest expand. But it was necessary. He'll come after you now, not just for the water rights, for all of it. The land, the challenge to his authority, and especially for them. Henry gestured to Lila and Daisy. Vance Crowell doesn't lose, Mr. Rourke, and he especially doesn't lose publicly. Then I guess it's time someone taught him. Cole's voice was quiet, final. Because he's not getting my ranch, and he's definitely not getting them. Henry studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You'll need help. Evidence, legal support, allies Crowell can't buy or intimidate. I might know some people. I'll take all the help I can get. Lila looked up then, her eyes red but dry, her jaw set with determination that matched the steel in Cole's voice. We fight him, together, all the way. Together, Cole agreed. And standing there on the steps of Hart's boarding house with a traumatized child crying in her mother's arms and a mining company preparing for war, Cole Rourke committed himself to a battle he might not win. For people he'd known less than 2 weeks, for reasons that had nothing to do with land or water, and everything to do with the terrified little girl who'd stopped breathing when she saw Vance Crowell's face. The ride back to Red Hollow was quiet, Daisy asleep between them, exhausted from fear and tears. Lila stared at the horizon with an expression Cole was beginning to recognize, that look of someone calculating odds and refusing to accept the numbers. He knows where I am now, she said finally. He'll use it. Let him try. Cole, she stopped, and he realized it was the first time she'd used his given name. You don't have to do this. Daisy and I could leave, go somewhere farther. No. You haven't even heard. I don't need to hear it. You're not leaving. Cole kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the reins. Red Hollow's your home now if you want it to be, and I don't give up what's mine without a fight. Lila was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible over the wagon wheels. Why are you doing this? It was the same question she'd asked that morning, and Cole still didn't have simple answers. But sitting there with twilight painting the Wyoming sky, purple and gold, with a sleeping child between them and a war on the horizon, he found words that felt closer to truth. Because someone should. Because it's right. And because... He paused, then pushed forward. Because when I look at that cookhouse light burning at the end of the day, I don't see just a building anymore. I see home, and I don't let anyone destroy that. Lila's hand found his on the bench between them, her fingers cold but steady. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. They rode the rest of the way in silence, carrying the weight of what they'd started and the certainty that there was no turning back now. Vance Crowell had declared war, and Cole Rourke had just accepted the challenge. The ranch hands were waiting when they pulled into the yard just after dark, their faces tense in the lamplight spilling from the bunkhouse. Barnett stepped forward first, his weathered features creased with concern. How bad? He asked simply. Cole handed Lila down from the wagon, then carefully lifted Daisy into her mother's arms. The child stirred but didn't wake, her face peaceful in sleep despite the day's terror. Bad enough. Get everyone inside. Main house, not the bunkhouse. We need to talk. 20 minutes later, Cole's kitchen, a room he rarely used for anything but morning coffee, held his entire crew plus Lila, who'd settled Daisy in the cookhouse before joining them. The men sat around his table looking grim and ready, the kind of expression that came from hard lives and harder choices. Cole didn't waste time on preamble. Crowell Mining wants my water rights. They've sent lawyers with threats disguised as offers, and today I met Vance Crowell himself in Clearwater. He made it clear he's willing to crush anyone who stands between him and what he wants. He paused, meeting each man's eyes in turn. That includes this ranch. That includes all of us, and especially it includes Miss Hart and her daughter. Jack Reeves leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. So we're fighting mining company money and influence. That about sum it up? That's about the size of it. Good. Jack's grin was fierce. I was getting bored with regular ranch work anyway. Tommy Chen nodded agreement. My family got pushed out of railroad work by men like Crowell, men who think money means they own people. I say we make him regret coming after Red Hollow. Barnett looked at Lila with gentle understanding. Miss Hart, You want to tell us what we're really dealing with? Because I'm guessing this isn't just about water. Lila's hands were steady on the table, but her voice carried the weight of months of fear. Vance Crowell has been pursuing me since last spring. When I refused his advances, he started targeting my father's business. The boarding house has survived 20 years in Clearwater, but in 6 months, Crowell's nearly destroyed it through systematic sabotage made to look like accidents and bad luck. He told me explicitly that everything would stop if I agreed to marry him. When I kept refusing, he escalated. She took a breath. Daisy witnessed him corner me 4 months ago. She hasn't been the same since. That's why I took this position, to escape him. But he found us today, and now he knows exactly where we are and who's protecting us. So he'll use your presence here as leverage against the boss, Barnett said thoughtfully. Try to force a deal, water rights, plus he gets you back in Clearwater, all wrapped up in one neat package. That's his style. He likes winning on multiple fronts simultaneously. Lila's jaw tightened. And he always wins. I've watched him break stronger people than us. Cole's voice cut through the gathering despair. Then we'll be the first ones who don't break. Boss, Jack said carefully, no disrespect to Miss Hart, but we're 6 ranch hands and a cook against a mining operation with territorial influence. How exactly do we win that fight? It was the question Cole had been wrestling with since leaving Clearwater. Pure force wouldn't work. They were outmanned, outgunned, and outspent. Legal channels were compromised by Crowell's money and connections. Running would only delay the inevitable, which left strategy, leverage, and the kind of calculated risk that separated survivors from casualties. We find evidence that Crowell's been using fraudulent legal tactics to acquire property, Cole said. The territorial land clerk indicated that if we could prove systematic fraud, he'd have grounds to freeze Crowell's operations pending investigation. That would buy us time and bring in outside authorities Crowell doesn't control. Where do we get this evidence? Tommy asked. Crowell's office at the mine headquarters. According to Miss Hart, he keeps detailed records of his business dealings. If we can access those records, we might find proof of the pattern: falsified surveys, manufactured legal challenges, documented extortion. The room went very quiet. Finally, Barnett spoke, his voice carefully neutral. You're talking about breaking into a mining company office and stealing documents. I'm talking about obtaining evidence of crimes already committed. The law might not see it that way. The law's already being manipulated by Crowell. We play by his rules, we lose. Cole looked around the table. I'm not ordering anyone into this. If you want to draw your pay and leave, no hard feelings, but I'm staying and I'm fighting because Red Hollow is worth defending. So are the people on it. Jack spoke first. I'm in. Always wanted to rob a mining company. It's not robbery, Tommy pointed out. It's tactical document acquisition. He grinned. Also, I'm in. The others voiced agreement one by one until only Barnett remained. The old ranch hand sat silent, studying Cole with eyes that had seen too much of the world's ugliness to be easily shocked. You know this changes everything, Barnett said quietly. You're not just defending property anymore. You're declaring war on a man who destroys people for sport, and you're doing it for a woman and child you've known less than 2 weeks. I know. Your daddy would say you're being a fool, that caring about people makes you weak. Cole met his gaze steadily. My father drank himself to death because he couldn't live with losing the person he loved. I'd say that proves caring makes you human, not weak. And I'd rather be human and fighting than safe and alone. Barnett's weathered face creased into something that might have been a smile. Well then, I guess I'm in too. Someone needs to keep you young fools from getting killed. Relief washed through Cole, though he kept his expression neutral. Good. Now here's what we know. Mine headquarters is a 2-story building at the north end of Clearwater. Crowell's office is on the 2nd floor southwest corner. There's a night watchman who makes rounds every 2 hours, and the building locks at 7. We'll need someone who can pick locks, someone who knows how to move quietly, and someone who can read through business documents fast enough to identify what's useful. I can pick locks, Jack offered. Grew up in Chicago, learned all sorts of useful skills before I decided ranch work was more honest. I move quiet, Tommy said. And I read fast. Helped my father with bookkeeping when I was young. I'll go with them, Barnett added. Extra hands? And I'm old enough that if we're caught, I can play confused and wandering. You stay here, boss. You get arrested, the ranch has no legal owner to fight for it. Cole wanted to argue but recognized the logic. Fine, but Miss Hart comes too. Every head swiveled toward Lila, who'd been silent through the planning. She looked back at them with calm determination. I know Crowell's filing system. I've been in that office before, back when he was still pretending to be civilized. I can identify the relevant documents faster than anyone else. She paused. And if we're caught, I can distract him long enough for you to escape with whatever we've found. Absolutely not, Cole said flatly. You're not using yourself as bait. I'm already bait. Crowell wants me. That's leverage we can use if necessary. Lila's voice stayed steady despite the fear Cole could see in her eyes. Besides, this is my fight as much as yours. He's terrorized my family, threatened my daughter, and turned my life into a nightmare. I'm not sitting home while other people take risks for me. Cole recognized the steel in her voice because he heard it in his own. This wasn't about logic anymore. It was about dignity, agency, the need to face your demons instead of hiding from them. He understood that need in his bones. You stay with me, he said finally. If the others get caught, we need people outside who can respond. And someone needs to watch Daisy. My father can watch Daisy. He's coming here tomorrow. I'm not leaving her in Clearwater where Crowell can access her. Lila's hands were steady on the table. I'm going with the team. That's not negotiable. Cole looked at Barnett, who shrugged with the fatalism of a man who'd long since given up trying to stop determined women from risking their lives. Your call, boss. It wasn't really a call at all. Lila was right. Her knowledge of Crowell's systems could mean the difference between success and failure. And keeping her locked away while others fought her battle would break something in her that Cole was beginning to realize he wanted to protect even more than her physical safety. Fine, he said, but you follow Barnett's lead, you move when he says move, and if things go wrong, you run. No heroics, no sacrifices. Clear? Clear. They spent the next hour planning details. Timing, entry points, escape routes, signals if things went wrong. It was decided they'd move in 3 days, giving Henry time to arrive with Daisy, giving them time to scout the building and the watchman's patterns, giving Crowell time to relax his guard after the confrontation in Clearwater. When the meeting broke up, the men filed out with the grim purpose of soldiers preparing for battle. Cole watched them go, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavier on his shoulders. These were good men who'd signed on for ranch work, not criminal enterprise. If this went wrong, he'd be the one who'd led them there. Lila lingered after the others left, standing by the window looking out at the darkness beyond the ranch yard. Cole joined her, close enough to feel her warmth, far enough to maintain the pretense of professional distance they'd been carefully preserving. Thank you, she said quietly, for including me in this, for not trying to lock me away like fragile china. You're about as fragile as Wyoming granite. A smile ghosted across her face, there and gone. I'm terrified. Every minute of every day since Crowell started his pursuit, but I'm also angry and tired of running and ready to fight back even if it destroys me. It won't destroy you. You can't promise that. No, Cole admitted. But I can promise you won't face it alone. And I can promise that whatever happens, Daisy stays safe. That's not negotiable. Lila turned to face him fully, and in the lamplight, her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Why are you doing this? And don't give me the speech about defending property or doing what's right. Tell me the real reason. Cole had been avoiding this question, avoiding the truth it demanded, because acknowledging it meant accepting vulnerability he'd spent years armoring against. But standing there with Lila looking at him like he held answers she desperately needed, he couldn't hide anymore. Because when you arrived, this ranch was just land and cattle and work. It was what I built to prove I could survive alone, to prove I didn't need what destroyed my father. The words came rough, unpracticed. But then you turned the cookhouse into something warm. You made the men laugh. You brought Daisy, who's scared and brave at the same time, who watches the horses like she's memorizing beauty. And somewhere in the last 2 weeks, Red Hollow stopped being just property and became something worth protecting because of the people on it, because of you. Lila's breath caught. Cole, I'm not asking for anything, he continued quickly. I know this is complicated, that you're running from one man's unwanted attention and probably don't need another man making declarations. But you asked for truth, and the truth is, I care what happens to you and Daisy, more than I've cared about anything in a long time. So I'm fighting for my ranch, yes, but I'm also fighting for you, and I'm not ashamed of that. The silence between them felt vast and fragile. Then Lila closed the distance, standing so close Cole could count the gold flecks in her dark eyes. I've spent 6 months believing I was alone except for my daughter and father. That no one would stand against Crowell because the cost was too high. That caring about me meant danger, so the best I could hope for was benign indifference. Her voice was barely a whisper. But you've given me hope that maybe safety doesn't mean isolation. That maybe there are still people who choose courage over comfort. Lila, I care about you too. The admission came out fierce, almost defiant, and that terrifies me because everyone I care about becomes a target. But I'm tired of letting fear make my choices. So I'm telling you plainly, I care about you, I'm grateful for your protection, and I'm going to fight alongside you because this is my battle too. Cole's hand moved of its own accord, cupping her face with a gentleness that surprised him. Lila leaned into the touch, her eyes closing briefly, as if savoring contact she'd denied herself for too long. Then Daisy's voice drifted from the cookhouse, small and frightened, calling for her mother. Lila stepped back immediately, the moment breaking like morning mist. I should go to her. She has nightmares. Go. We'll talk more later. Lila nodded and left, moving quickly toward her daughter's need. Cole stood alone in his kitchen, feeling the absence of her warmth like a physical thing, knowing he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross, and finding he didn't regret it. He'd spent 4 years building walls to prevent exactly this kind of attachment. And in 2 weeks, Lila and Daisy had dismantled them completely. The next 3 days passed in careful preparation disguised as normal ranch routine. Henry Hart arrived with 2 trunks of belongings and a grim determination that matched his daughter's. He'd closed the boarding house temporarily, telling neighbors he was visiting family, a lie thin enough that Crowell would see through it immediately, but at least it established a reason for his absence. Daisy seemed to breathe easier with her grandfather present, though she still startled at sudden sounds and watched the road with anxious eyes. Henry was gentle with her, telling stories about her grandmother, teaching her to play checkers, giving her small tasks that made her feel useful without overwhelming her. Cole found himself watching them during meals, the way Henry's patience never wavered, how Daisy slowly relaxed into his steady presence, the way Lila's shoulders lost some of their tension knowing her father was there. It painted a picture of family that looked nothing like Cole's childhood memories of violence and silence. This was what family could be: support without demands, love without conditions, strength that came from choosing to stand together. Meanwhile, Tommy and Jack made discreet trips to Clearwater, mapping the mine headquarters and the watchman's patterns. The man was predictable, rounds at 8 and 10, then sleeping at his desk until dawn. The building's rear entrance had a simple lock, and the second floor was accessible via an exterior staircase that saw little traffic after dark. It's almost too easy, Jack reported on the second evening. Makes me nervous. Crowell's arrogant, Lila said. He doesn't think anyone would dare challenge him, so he doesn't bother with elaborate security. The threat of his retaliation is supposed to be protection enough. Then we make sure he never knows who hit him until it's too late, Barnett said. They chose Thursday night for the operation, late enough in the week that the watchmen would be tired, early enough that weekend activity wouldn't complicate their escape. Cole spent that afternoon checking and rechecking their plan, looking for weaknesses, trying not to imagine everything that could go wrong. As twilight painted the sky purple and gold, Lila emerged from the cookhouse dressed in dark clothes borrowed from the ranch stores, her hair braided tight and pinned under a dark cap. She looked like a shadow-given form, and the determination in her eyes made Cole's chest tighten with admiration and fear. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly, one last attempt. "Yes, I do." Lila checked the leather satchel she'd carry for documents. "Daisy's asleep. My father knows what we're doing. He's not happy, but he understands. And I'm ready. If things go wrong, they won't." She touched his arm briefly. "We're careful, we're smart, and we're fighting for something that matters. That has to count for something. Barnett, Jack, and Tommy emerged from the bunkhouse similarly dressed in dark, nondescript clothing. They looked like ranch hands preparing for night work, which was close enough to truth. They'd take horses to within a mile of Clearwater, then approach on foot to avoid attracting attention. 2 hours in and out, Barnett said. If we're not back by midnight, assume we're caught and respond accordingly. Cole nodded, not trusting his voice. He watched them mount up, watched Lila settle into her saddle with practiced ease, watched the group ride out into the gathering darkness until they were swallowed by distance and night. Then he returned to the main house where Henry sat with a rifle across his knees and a book he wasn't reading. Hardest part's the waiting, the older man observed. How do you stand it? Letting her ride into danger? Henry looked at him with weary understanding. You don't let Lila do anything. She decides, and you either support her or get out of the way. Learned that when she was 12 and decided to help run the boarding house after her mother passed. Strong women don't ask permission, Mr. Rourke. They inform you of their decisions and expect you to keep up. Call me Cole. Only if you call me Henry. The older man set his book aside. You care about my daughter. It wasn't a question, but Cole answered anyway. Yes. And about Daisy? Yes. Good, because they deserve someone who will stand with them, not try to control them. Someone who understands that protection means partnership, not possession. Henry's gaze was sharp, assessing. Vance Crowell wanted to own Lila. You want to stand beside her. That's the difference that matters. Cole absorbed this, feeling the truth of it settle into his bones. I won't let Crowell hurt them. I know. That's why I'm not stopping this insanity. Henry picked up his book again. Now we wait and pray they're as smart as they are brave. The waiting was indeed the hardest part. Cole tried to review accounts, check supplies, plan next week's work rotation. Nothing held his attention. His mind kept circling back to Clearwater, to Lila moving through dark hallways, to 1,000 things that could go wrong. By 11 o'clock, he was pacing. By 11:30, he'd checked the road so many times Henry told him to sit down before he wore a trench in the floor. At 1:45, hoofbeats sounded from the darkness. Cole was outside before conscious thought, rifle ready, every muscle tensed for fight or flight. But it was them, all 4 riders, moving fast but controlled, no signs of pursuit. Barnett led, with Lila close behind, Jack and Tommy flanking. They pulled up in the yard, horses breathing hard but not blown, riders intact, and, Cole's eyes catalogued quickly, uninjured. Lila dismounted smoothly, a bulging satchel clutched tight to her chest, her face flushed with exertion and something that looked dangerously close to triumph. We got it, she said simply. All of it. Inside, spread across Cole's kitchen table, the evidence of Vance Crowell's systematic fraud emerged in damning detail. Lila sorted through documents with practiced efficiency while the others watched, still riding the adrenaline of their successful infiltration. Survey alterations for the Morrison Ranch. Original shows their creek entirely on their property. Crowell's version shows it crossing into territorial land subject to mining claims. She set that aside and pulled another file. Legal correspondence regarding the Patterson homestead. Notes indicating Pemberton was instructed to file frivolous challenges to extend court proceedings until legal costs forced settlement. More documents emerged, each one a piece of a larger picture. Forged signatures on mineral rights transfers, records of payments to territorial officials with notes about their cooperation on specific cases. Letters between Crowell and Pemberton discussing strategies for isolating and pressuring targeted landowners. It's all here, Tommy breathed. Every dirty trick, every fraudulent claim, documented like he was proud of it. He was proud, Lila said bitterly. This is how powerful men operate. They document their victories because they don't believe they'll ever be held accountable. Cole studied the papers, his mind already calculating. This is enough to trigger an investigation, more than enough. But we need to get it to Samuel Brennan without Crowell knowing where it came from. I can handle that, Henry said from the doorway. Daisy stood beside him, sleepy-eyed but awake, drawn by the commotion. I'll take it to Sam tomorrow morning. Tell him an anonymous source concerned about territorial land fraud left it at the boarding house. Sam's smart. He'll know what to do with it. Crowell will know it came from us eventually, Jack pointed out. Probably, Cole agreed. But by then, the investigation will be official, outside authorities will be involved, and Crowell's attention will be on fighting legal battles instead of crushing individual ranchers. It buys us time and levels the field. Lila was quiet, her expression distant. Cole moved to stand beside her, close enough for private conversation. What is it? I was in that office before. 6 months ago, when Crowell first started pursuing me. He invited me for dinner, showed me his headquarters, like he was trying to impress me. I stood in that exact room while he told me about his vision for Clearwater, his plans for expansion, how everything he touched turned to gold. Her voice was soft, remembering. Tonight I broke into that same office and stole the evidence that might destroy him, and it felt like taking back something he'd stolen from me first. He did steal from you, your safety, your peace, your ability to live without fear. I know, but I also know that tonight changes things. Once we deliver these documents, there's no going back. Crowell will come after us with everything he has. Are we ready for that? Cole looked around his kitchen, at ranch hands who'd risked criminal charges to help, at Henry who'd closed his business to protect his family, at Daisy watching them with worried eyes, at Lila herself standing strong despite exhaustion and fear. This was what he'd built. Not just land and buildings, but something bigger. Something worth defending. We're ready, he said, and we're not backing down. Henry left before dawn, documents secured in his saddlebag, heading for Clearwater with the grim determination of a man who'd waited years to strike back. Cole watched him ride out, knowing they'd crossed a point of no return. The evidence was in motion. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Breakfast that morning had the strange quality of waiting for storm clouds to break. The crew ate in unusual silence, their brief victory tempered by awareness of what it would likely cost. Lila moved through her cooking with mechanical precision, her mind clearly elsewhere. Daisy stayed close to her mother, picking at food she didn't eat, sensing the tension even if she didn't understand its source. How long before Crowell realizes his office was compromised? Tommy asked finally. Could be today, could be next week, depending on when he looks for those specific files, Barnett said. Man like that probably has dozens of ongoing schemes. He might not notice right away. But when he does notice, Jack didn't finish the thought. When he does, he'll know it was us, Lila said quietly. The timing's too convenient. His confrontation with us in Clearwater, then his office gets robbed 3 days later. He's not stupid. Let him know, Cole said. Long as the documents are already with territorial authorities, there's nothing he can do about it. He can suspect all he wants, but proving we took them is another matter. It was weak comfort, and everyone knew it. They finished breakfast in continued silence, then dispersed to normal ranch work with abnormal awareness, every person keeping half their attention on the road that led from Clearwater. The riders appeared just after noon, not Crowell himself, but 6 men wearing deputy badges and carrying themselves with the arrogance of hired muscle dressed in legal authority. Cole met them in the yard, flanked by Barnett and Jack, very aware of Lila watching from the cookhouse window. The lead rider dismounted with theatrical precision. Cole Rourke? That's right. I'm Deputy Marshal William Crenshaw. I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of theft and breaking and entering at Crowell Mining headquarters. He produced papers with official seals. You'll need to come with us to Clearwater for questioning. Cole had expected this, had planned for it, even, but the reality still hit like a fist to the gut. On whose complaint? Vance Crowell filed a formal report this morning. Security evidence places you and several accomplices at the mine headquarters last Thursday night. I was here all Thursday night. My entire crew can attest to that. Crenshaw smiled without warmth. Ranch hands lying to protect their boss? Not exactly credible testimony. The evidence is clear. You were identified by a witness. What witness? That'll be revealed during official proceedings. Right now you need to come with us. Crenshaw's hand moved to his gun belt in casual threat. We can do this easy or hard, Mr. Rourke. Behind him, Cole heard the cookhouse door open. He didn't turn, but he knew. Lila was stepping out, her voice clear and steady, carrying across the yard. You have the wrong person, Deputy Marshal. Mr. Rourke didn't break into Crowell's office. She walked forward with her head high, every inch a woman who'd made a decision and wouldn't be swayed from it. I did. Cole spun toward her. fury and fear warring in his chest. "Lila, no! I acted alone," she continued, ignoring him completely, her attention fixed on Crenshaw with unwavering intensity. "Mr. Rourke had no knowledge of my actions. I'm the one who entered Crowell Mining headquarters. I'm the one who took the documents. If you're making arrests, you arrest me." Crenshaw looked between them, calculation moving behind his eyes. This wasn't the script Crowell had written. Cole could see the deputy reassessing, trying to determine which arrest would serve his employer's purposes better. "Miss Hart, is it?" Crenshaw's voice took on a false gentleness that made Cole's skin crawl. "You're saying you broke into a secured building and stole company property all by yourself? A woman acting alone against a mining operation?" "I'm saying I'm responsible for the theft you're investigating." Lila's chin lifted. "And I'm prepared to face the consequences." "Lila, stop talking." Cole moved between her and the deputies, his voice low and urgent. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." Her eyes met his, and he saw the fear there, but also the steel resolve. "They can't prove you were involved, but I'm admitting it. That's what matters legally. And we both know Crowell wants me more than he wants you. This gives him what he wants while protecting everyone else. It puts you directly in his power. I've been in his power for months. At least this way I'm choosing my surrender instead of having it forced on me." She turned back to Crenshaw. "Take me to Clearwater. I'll make a full statement." The deputy marshal studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. "If you're confessing, I'm obligated to take you in. Though I have to say, Mr. Crowell might have some questions about why you'd commit such a crime." "Then he can ask me himself." Lila's voice stayed steady, but Cole saw her hands trembling slightly. "I assume I'm allowed to gather some personal items?" "Make it quick." Lila walked toward the cookhouse with her head high, and Cole followed, catching her arm once they were out of immediate earshot. "This is insane. They can't prove anything against me. Why are you confessing?" "Because Crowell will manufacture proof if he needs to. He's got judges and sheriffs in his pocket. He can keep you tied up in legal proceedings for months while Red Hollow falls apart." Lila's voice was fierce, urgent. "But if I confess, if I give him what he really wants, there's a chance he'll accept the victory and leave you alone. You think he'll just let you confess to theft and call it even? Lila, he'll use this to control you. He's been trying to control me for half a year. At least this way I'm trading my freedom for something that matters." She pulled free of his grip, moving toward the cookhouse. "Promise me you'll take care of Daisy. Promise me you won't let Crowell anywhere near her." "I promise." "But Lila..." She stopped, turning back to face him fully. In the harsh noon light, her face showed every sleepless night, every moment of fear she'd carried, and underneath it all, a core of determination that Cole recognized because he'd built his entire life on the same foundation. "I know what I'm doing," she said quietly, "and I know you'll fight for me. But right now, the best thing you can do is let me handle this my way. Please." Cole wanted to argue, wanted to physically prevent her from walking into Crowell's trap, wanted to find some third option that didn't require her sacrifice. But he also understood what she was doing, buying time with the only currency she had, trading herself to protect people she cared about. It was exactly what he would have done in her position. "I'll get you out," he said instead. "However long it takes, whatever it costs. I'll get you out." Lila's smile was sad and sweet. "I know you'll try. Just keep Daisy safe. That's all I ask." She disappeared into the cookhouse. Through the window, Cole saw her kneel beside Daisy, speaking urgently while the child's face crumpled with incomprehension and fear. Henry had emerged from the main house, his expression murderous as he assessed the deputies in the yard. He started toward Cole, but Barnett intercepted him, speaking quietly, keeping him from doing something that would end in bloodshed. Lila emerged 5 minutes later with a small bag and eyes that were red but dry. Daisy clung to her skirt, crying silently, and Cole watched Lila pry the child's fingers loose with gentle firmness. "Be brave for Mama," she murmured, kissing Daisy's forehead. "Grandpa and Mr. Rourke will take care of you. I'll be back soon, I promise." It was a promise Cole knew she couldn't keep, but Daisy nodded anyway, choking on sobs, her small body shaking. Henry gathered his granddaughter into his arms while Lila walked toward the waiting deputies with her shoulders back and her head high. Crenshaw helped her mount with exaggerated courtesy, then signaled his men to form up. As they prepared to leave, he turned back to Cole with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Crowell will be pleased to know the guilty party has been apprehended. I'm sure he'll want to discuss the matter with Miss Hart personally. He takes crimes against his property very seriously. The threat was clear, deliberate. We'll be in touch if we need anything further from Red Hollow Ranch. They rode out, Lila sitting straight in the saddle despite being flanked by armed men, never looking back. Cole watched until dust swallowed them, feeling something fundamental tear in his chest. "Boss?" Barnett's voice was gentle. "We need a plan." Cole turned to find his entire crew gathered in the yard, their faces set with grim purpose. Henry stood apart, holding a sobbing Daisy, his expression promising violence. "The documents," Cole said, forcing his mind to work through rage and fear. "Did Henry deliver them to Brennan?" "Left them this morning before dawn. Sam has everything. He was already drafting his official report when I rode out." Henry's voice was rough with fury. "But it'll take time for territorial authorities to respond, and meanwhile Crowell has my daughter." "Then we go get her." Jack's hand rested on his gun. 6 of us. We ride into Clearwater, take her back by force, and get her killed in the crossfire or yourselves arrested for assault." Cole shook his head. "Crowell's expecting us to react with violence. That's what he wants. Justification to bring in more law, maybe even federal marshals. We play into his hands. We lose everything." "So what do we do?" Tommy demanded. "Just let him keep her?" "No. We use the time her sacrifice bought us." Cole's mind was already calculating, planning. Crowell thinks he's won. He's got Lila. He stopped the theft investigation by having his thief arrested, and he probably assumes we'll either fold or do something stupid. We do neither. We wait for Brennan's investigation to gain traction, and we find leverage of our own. "What kind of leverage?" Barnett asked. "The kind that makes Crowell realize keeping Lila is more expensive than releasing her. The kind that threatens something he values more than revenge." Cole looked at Henry. "You said Crowell has investors, that his mining operations depend on outside capital and territorial contracts." "That's right. Eastern money, mostly. Men who want profit, not scandal." "Then we give them scandal. We make Crowell's fraud investigation public. We make sure every newspaper in the territory knows that Crowell Mining is under investigation for systematic property theft. We make his investors nervous enough to demand answers." Cole's voice hardened. "And while he's busy trying to control that disaster, we negotiate Lila's release." Henry studied him with new respect. "That could work. If Brennan moves fast enough, if the newspapers print the story, if Crowell's investors actually care about the fraud." "A lot of ifs," Jack observed. "Better than storming Clearwater with 6 men and getting cut down in the street." Cole turned to Tommy. "Can you ride to the territorial capital? We need to reach newspapers that aren't in Crowell's pocket. Get them interested in a story about mining company corruption." "I can ride." "But what's the story?" "We can't prove the documents came from Crowell's office without admitting we stole them." "We don't have to prove where they came from. We just have to get reporters interested in asking questions. Tell them there's an ongoing investigation into fraudulent land claims. Tell them multiple ranchers have been forced off their property through suspicious legal challenges. Tell them territorial officials are examining evidence of systematic corruption. Let the reporters dig. They love scandals involving powerful men." "And while Tommy's doing that," Barnett asked, "we fortify Red Hollow and wait. Crowell might send more deputies with more warrants, might try intimidation or sabotage. We stay alert, stay together, and we don't give him any excuse to escalate legally." Cole paused. "And we take care of Daisy. Show her that even when things are terrible, people keep their promises." The child in question had quieted to hiccuping sobs, her face buried in Henry's shoulder. Cole approached slowly, speaking gently. "Daisy, your mama asked me to keep you safe. That's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to bring her home. Do you believe me?" Daisy lifted her tear-stained face, studying him with those 2 old eyes that had seen far too much. Finally, she nodded. A tiny movement, but deliberate. "Good. Can you be brave a little longer?" Another nod, this one firmer. Cole felt something in his chest tighten with protective fury. This child had been terrorized by Crowell's pursuit of her mother, had watched her mother sacrifice freedom to protect others, and was now being asked to trust strangers to make things right. The fact that she was trying at all spoke to a courage that humbled him. "We'll get her back," he promised, to Daisy and to himself. "Whatever it takes." Tommy left within the hour, carrying letters for 3 territorial newspapers and enough money to ensure speedy delivery. The rest of them settled into a tense routine: ranch work during daylight, watches at night, constant awareness of the road from Clearwater. Henry threw himself into helping with ranch tasks, channeling fear and rage into physical labor. Daisy shadowed him everywhere, speaking rarely but staying close, finding comfort in her grandfather's solid presence. Cole spent his evenings in the cookhouse, trying to maintain the warmth Lila had created there, but failing miserably. His coffee was too strong, his meals functional but joyless, and the building felt hollow without her competent presence filling it with purpose. Daisy sometimes sat in the corner on her small stool, watching him with sad eyes, and Cole wished desperately that he had Lila's gift for comfort. 2 days after her arrest, a rider arrived from Clearwater, not deputies this time, but a boy of maybe 14 carrying a sealed letter addressed to Cole Rourke. The boy refused payment, claimed he'd been hired anonymously to deliver the message, and left quickly before questions could be asked. Cole opened the letter with hands that wanted to shake and found Lila's handwriting, cramped, hurried, but unmistakably hers. "Cole, I'm being held at the hotel under house arrest pending formal charges. Crowell visited yesterday. He's offered a deal. He'll drop all charges and release me if I agree to marry him and if you sign over Red Hollow's water rights. He says it's a package solution that benefits everyone. I told him no. I'm telling you the same. Don't trade your ranch for me. Don't give him what he wants. The investigation is our best chance. Let it run its course. I can endure this. Stay safe. Protect Daisy. That's all that matters." L. Cole read it 3 times, rage building with each pass. The arrogance of it, packaging Lila like property in a business transaction, assuming fear would force capitulation, using her imprisonment as leverage to get everything he wanted at once. "He's testing us," Barnett said, reading over Cole's shoulder, "seeing if we'll crack under pressure. He's underestimating us." Cole's voice was cold, controlled. "He thinks we're ordinary people who'll fold when threatened. He hasn't figured out yet that we're too stubborn to know when we're beaten. Boss, what if the investigation doesn't move fast enough? What if Crowell actually presses charges, sends her to territorial prison?" Jack's concern was written plainly on his face. She could serve real time for this. She won't, because Brennan's investigation is about to become very public, very expensive for Crowell, and very difficult to ignore. Cole folded the letter carefully. "And because I'm going to Clearwater to remind Vance Crowell that some people fight back." "That's exactly what he wants," Henry warned. "You show up angry and threatening, he'll have you arrested too." "I'm not going to threaten him. I'm going to negotiate." Cole's smile was sharp, dangerous. "On my terms. In public. With witnesses who matter. It's time Mr. Crowell learned that he's not the only one who can play power games." The next morning, Cole rode into Clearwater dressed in his best clothes, still ranch wear, but clean and presentable, carrying himself with the deliberate confidence of a man who refused to be intimidated. He went directly to the hotel, ignoring the stares of townspeople who'd clearly heard about Lila's arrest and requested a meeting with Vance Crowell. The desk clerk tried to put him off, but Cole simply settled into the lobby and announced he'd wait. He'd been there 20 minutes when Crowell himself appeared at the top of the stairs, dressed impeccably as always, his expression showing mild amusement. "Mr. Rourke, how unexpected." Crowell descended with theatrical leisure. "I assume you're here about Miss Hart." "I'm here to discuss the terms of her release." "Ah, so you've reconsidered my offer." "No, I've come to present a counteroffer." Cole kept his voice level, conversational, aware of the clerk listening avidly and of other guests gathering in doorways. "You release Miss Hart immediately, drop all charges, and leave Red Hollow's water rights alone. In exchange, I don't press charges for her unlawful imprisonment and harassment." Crowell laughed, genuine amusement that carried contempt. "You're in no position to press charges, Mr. Rourke. She confessed to theft. She's being held legally." "Is she? Because from what I understand, you're keeping her confined in a hotel room without formal charges filed. without access to legal counsel, and without any actual evidence she committed the crime she confessed to. Cole let that sink in. That starts to look less like lawful detention and more like kidnapping, Mr. Crowell, especially if the right people start asking questions. The amusement faded from Crowell's face. Careful, Mr. Rourke. You're making accusations you can't prove. Am I? Because I've been talking to territorial officials about proper procedures for arrests and detention. And I've been talking to newspapers about unusual legal situations involving mining companies. People are starting to ask interesting questions. Cole's smile was cold. How long do you think your investors will tolerate scandal? How comfortable will they be knowing their capital is tied up in a company under investigation for fraud? There's no investigation. Actually, there is. Territorial Land Office opened a formal inquiry 3 days ago based on evidence of systematic fraud in mining claims and water rights transfers. I'm sure you'll be receiving official notice very soon. Cole watched fury and calculation war on Crowell's features. The newspapers are already interested. One even sent a reporter to interview ranchers who've been forced off their land through suspicious legal challenges. Your name keeps coming up. Crowell's jaw tightened. You're bluffing. Am I? Check with your lawyers. Ask them about the territorial inquiry. Ask them how long fraud investigations typically take and how much damage they can do to a company's reputation, even if no charges are ultimately filed. Cole leaned forward slightly. Or better yet, ask your investors how they feel about uncertainty. The silence stretched taut and dangerous. Around them, the hotel lobby had gone very quiet, everyone straining to hear. Cole had counted on this. Public confrontation meant witnesses, meant Crowell couldn't simply disappear him, meant everything said here would spread through Clearwater by nightfall. Even if there's an investigation, Crowell said finally, his voice tight with controlled rage, it changes nothing about Miss Hart's situation. She confessed to a crime. She's facing charges. Your little publicity campaign won't change that. Maybe not, but it will make her continued detention very visible. And it will make people wonder why you're so focused on punishing one woman for alleged theft, when you should be defending your company against fraud charges. Cole straightened. Here's what I think, Mr. Crowell. I think you're using legal pretense to hold Miss Hart because she rejected you and embarrassed you. I think you've been harassing her family for months because you can't accept that a woman might not want your attention. And I think you're counting on fear and isolation to make her surrender. You know nothing about... I know that a man who has to trap a woman to get her acceptance isn't much of a man at all. Cole's voice carried through the lobby, deliberate and clear. I know that real power doesn't require terrorizing women and children. And I know that the kind of desperate control you're exercising suggests weakness, not strength. Crowell's face flushed with rage. You arrogant... I'm offering you a way out, Cole interrupted. Release Miss Hart. Drop the charges. Walk away from Red Hollow. In exchange, the investigation continues without my active assistance. The newspapers lose interest because there's no dramatic personal story, and you get to salvage some dignity by appearing reasonable instead of vindictive. And if I refuse, then I make this personal. I give the newspapers everything: your harassment of the Hart family, your attempts to force Miss Hart into marriage, your use of legal system as personal vendetta. I find every rancher you've crushed and help them organize. I make enough noise that your investors demand accountability. Cole held Crowell's furious gaze. And I make sure everyone knows that Vance Crowell, the great mining superintendent, was brought down by a ranch cook who had more courage than he had conscience. It was a gamble, putting all their leverage on the table, betting that Crowell's pride and business interests would outweigh his desire for revenge. Cole watched the calculation happen behind the other man's eyes, saw him weighing costs and benefits, saw the moment he realized that keeping Lila might cost more than releasing her. You think you've won something here, Crowell said quietly. You haven't. This is a minor setback in a much larger game. I don't want to win. I want you to leave my people alone. Cole's voice matched his for quiet intensity. Release Miss Hart, withdraw your claims to Red Hollow's water, and we'll call this finished. And the investigation? Out of my hands. That's territorial authority now. You'll have to handle it yourself. Cole paused. But I suspect if you're not actively trying to steal my land and terrorize my cook, I'll have less motivation to provide reporters with colorful quotes." Crowell was silent for a long moment, his expression promising future retribution even as he acknowledged current defeat. "Fine. Miss Hart will be released this afternoon. The charges will be dropped. And I'll withdraw my claim to Red Hollow's water rights, temporarily. Permanently. Don't push your luck, Mr. Rourke." "I'm not pushing luck, I'm establishing terms. Permanent withdrawal, documented and filed with the territorial office. Otherwise, this conversation never happened, and we proceed with legal warfare." More silence, more calculation. Finally, Crowell nodded once, sharp and angry. "Permanent withdrawal, documented. Satisfied?" "I'll be satisfied when Miss Hart walks free and the documents are filed." Cole turned toward the door, then paused. "One more thing, Mr. Crowell. If you ever approach Miss Hart, her daughter, or her father again, if you ever send lawyers or deputies or threats their direction, I won't come to negotiate. I'll come to finish this. Are we clear?" Crowell's smile was pure poison. "Crystal clear, Mr. Rourke. Though I should warn you, I don't forget insults, and I don't forgive interference in my affairs." "Neither do I. I guess that makes us even." Cole walked out without waiting for response, keeping his spine straight and his stride confident even though his heart was hammering, and his hands wanted to shake. He'd just declared war on one of the most powerful men in the territory, but he'd also won Lila's freedom. And in that moment, walking out of the hotel into harsh afternoon sunlight, Cole couldn't bring himself to regret a single word. He waited in the hotel lobby, ignoring the curious stares and whispered conversations swirling around him. Crowell had disappeared upstairs, presumably to arrange Lila's release, and Cole wasn't leaving until he saw her walk out free. It took 2 hours. Long enough that Cole started wondering if Crowell had gone back on his word, if this had all been theater designed to humiliate him. But finally there was movement on the stairs, and Lila appeared. She looked exhausted, shadows under her eyes, her dress rumpled, her hair escaping its pins. But she was whole, uninjured, and the moment she saw Cole, her face transformed with relief so profound it nearly broke him. "You came," she said, descending the stairs quickly. "Did you think I wouldn't?" Cole met her at the bottom, resisting the urge to pull her into his arms in front of all these watching eyes. "I hoped, I prayed, but I wasn't sure." Her voice broke. "Daisy? Safe at the ranch with your father. Worried about you, but safe." Relief washed over her features. "Crowell said the charges are dropped. He said you negotiated my release. What did you give him?" "Nothing he was entitled to. Come on, let's get you home." They walked out of the hotel together, Cole's hand at the small of her back, Lila leaning into the contact like she needed the support to stay upright. The street was busy with afternoon activity, but Cole noticed people stopping to stare, noticed the whispers that followed them. "They're talking about me," Lila said quietly. "About the arrest, the confession. My reputation in Clearwater is destroyed. Good thing you don't live in Clearwater anymore." Cole helped her mount the horse he'd brought for her. "Red Hollow's your home now, if you want it, and nobody there cares about Clearwater gossip." Lila's eyes shimmered with tears she wouldn't let fall. "Thank you for coming for me, for not giving up. I promised you I'd get you out. I keep my promises." They rode back to Red Hollow through golden afternoon light, not talking much but staying close, Lila's exhaustion evident in every line of her body. Cole watched her from the corner of his eye, seeing past the weariness to the strength underneath. She'd been imprisoned, threatened, offered as property in a business deal, and she'd emerged still fighting, still determined, still unbroken. He'd thought he understood what courage looked like, had built his entire identity around surviving alone, needing no one. But watching Lila ride beside him, heading toward a daughter who needed her and a life she'd chosen despite all the reasons to run, Cole realized his definition had been incomplete. Real courage wasn't isolation. It was choosing to stand with people even when it made you vulnerable. It was fighting for something bigger than yourself even when the cost was terrifying. It was Lila sacrificing her freedom to protect others, and Henry closing his business to keep his granddaughter safe, and ranch hands risking arrest to steal documents they couldn't read. It was all of them choosing to stand together when standing alone would have been easier. The ranch came into view as the sun touched the horizon, painting everything gold and crimson. And there in the yard stood Henry with Daisy, the child straining against her grandfather's hold the moment she spotted her mother. Lila dismounted while her horse was still moving, running the last few yards to sweep Daisy into her arms. The girl clung to her mother with desperate strength, crying and laughing simultaneously, babbling questions and endearments in a rush of words that suggested she'd been storing them up during Lila's absence. "I'm here, baby. I'm home. I'm not leaving again." Lila held her daughter tight, pressing kisses to her hair, her face, anywhere she could reach. "You were so brave. So brave." Cole dismounted more slowly, giving them space, watching Henry's face crumple with relief. The old man gripped Cole's shoulder hard. "Thank you," he said roughly. "Whatever you did, whatever it cost. Thank you." "She's the one who paid the cost. I just gave Crowell reasons to accept payment." Cole paused. "It's not over, Henry. The water rights withdrawal is documented, but Crowell's not the type to forget. We bought time, not permanent safety." "Time's enough for now." Henry watched his daughter and granddaughter with fierce tenderness. "Time to breathe, time to plan, time to build defenses. We'll use it well." The crew emerged from the bunkhouse, relief evident on their faces. Barnett clasped Lila's hand with grandfatherly affection. Jack and Tommy hovered nearby, grinning like fools. Even Daisy managed a shy wave for them, her tears drying as she soaked in the safety of familiar faces. That night, the cookhouse blazed with light and warmth as Lila insisted on making supper despite her exhaustion. She moved through her kitchen with visible relief, touching familiar tools, checking supplies, reclaiming the space that was hers. Daisy helped, quiet but present, never straying far from her mother's side. Cole watched from the doorway, not wanting to intrude but unable to stay away. Lila caught him watching and smiled, tired but genuine, the first real smile he'd seen from her in days. "You gonna stand there all night, or are you going to come in and tell me what really happened with Crowell?" she asked. Cole entered, settling at the table while she worked. "I went to the hotel, made a public scene, told him he was weak for needing to trap women, told him the investigation would damage his reputation more than releasing you would, and told him if he ever came near you or Daisy again, I'd finish what we started." Lila's hand stilled on the bread dough she was kneading. "You threatened Vance Crowell, publicly." "I negotiated terms. There's a difference." "Cole, he could have had you arrested. He could have made things so much worse." "He tried. I called his bluff." Cole leaned back in his chair. "Turns out Tommy's newspaper contacts paid off. There's already articles running in the territorial papers about the fraud investigation. Crowell's investors are nervous. He needed to look reasonable and in control, not vindictive and petty. So he let you go. For now." "For now," Cole agreed. "But we're not waiting for him to regroup. We're fortifying defenses, building alliances, making sure next time he comes, we're ready." Lila resumed kneading with thoughtful intensity. "He offered you a deal while I was imprisoned, marriage to him, water rights to you, in exchange for dropping all charges." "I know, you mentioned it in your letter. He was very confident you'd accept. Kept telling me that no ranch owner would choose a cook over valuable water rights, that I shouldn't expect loyalty from people who barely knew me." Her voice was carefully controlled. "He seemed genuinely surprised when I told him you'd never accept those terms." "Then he doesn't understand the first thing about loyalty, or about why people fight." Cole met her eyes across the kitchen. "I didn't come for you because you're my cook, Lila. I came because you matter, because Daisy matters, because what we've built here in 2 weeks matters more than any water rights or business deal." Lila set down her dough with deliberate care, wiping flour from her hands, then crossed to where Cole sat. She stood close enough that he could see gold flecks in her eyes, could count the freckles on her nose, could feel the warmth of her presence. "When I was sitting in that hotel room, waiting to see if you'd come or if Crowell would win, I made myself a promise," she said quietly. "I promised that if I got free, if I got another chance, I wouldn't waste it being cautious or scared. Life's too short and too uncertain to hide from the things that matter." "Lila," she kissed him, just leaned in and pressed her lips to his with the kind of decisive courage she brought to everything else, claiming what she wanted without apology. Cole froze for half a heartbeat. then responded with all the pent-up fear and relief and want he'd been suppressing since the moment she'd ridden away with Crowell's deputies. The kiss was soft and fierce simultaneously, tasting of flower and hope, and the promise of something neither of them had been looking for but both were too stubborn to deny. When they finally broke apart, breathless and trembling, Lila rested her forehead against his. "I'm choosing this," she whispered. "Choosing you. Choosing Red Hollow. Choosing to build something real instead of just surviving. If you'll have me." Cole's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with reverence. "I think I've been choosing you since the moment you demanded to inspect the cookhouse before agreeing to work here. I just didn't have words for it yet. Do you have words now? I'm falling in love with you, Lila Hart, and I'm terrified and grateful in equal measure." The admission came out rough, unpracticed, but absolutely true. "I don't know how to do this, how to care about someone without it destroying me like it destroyed my father. But I know I'd rather risk destruction than spend another day pretending I don't feel this." Lila's smile was brilliant, transforming her tired face into something radiant. "Then I guess we'll figure it out together," being terrified and brave at the same time. From the corner where she'd been playing quietly with carved wooden animals, Daisy's small voice interrupted. "Mama, are you and Mr. Cole getting married like the people in your stories?" They broke apart, both turning to find the child watching them with solemn curiosity. Lila laughed, the sound startled and joyful. "Maybe someday, baby. We're still figuring things out." "Good," Daisy announced with unexpected firmness. "I like it here. The horses are nice, and Mr. Cole keeps his promises." It was the most Cole had heard her say at once, and the simple trust in her voice made his throat tight. He knelt to her level, meeting those serious blue eyes. "I'll always keep my promises to you and your mama, Daisy. That's one you can count on." She studied him gravely, then nodded acceptance. "Okay. Can I feed the horses tomorrow?" "Absolutely. I'll teach you how they like their grain." Satisfied, Daisy returned to her toys, leaving Cole and Lila staring at each other with mingled wonder and terror at the future they were building. The days that followed Lila's return carried a quality of cautious hope, like the first thaw after a brutal winter when you weren't quite sure the cold wouldn't return. She slipped back into her routines with visible relief, reclaiming her cookhouse and her role in the ranch's daily rhythm. But Cole noticed how she checked the road more often, how her shoulders tensed at unexpected sounds, how she kept Daisy closer than before. Crowell hadn't struck back yet, but the waiting felt like holding your breath underwater, wondering how long you could last before you had to surface and face whatever was coming. The territorial investigation moved with bureaucratic slowness that tested everyone's patience. Samuel Brennan sent weekly updates through Henry, who'd reopened the boarding house but kept frequent contact with Red Hollow. The fraud evidence was solid, Brennan reported, and outside authorities were asking uncomfortable questions. But building a case against someone with Crowell's resources and connections took time, and time was a luxury none of them felt certain they possessed. 3 weeks after Lila's release, the uncertainty ended when a rider arrived bearing an official summons. Cole read it twice, then handed it to Lila without comment. She scanned the document, her face going pale. Crowell's demanding a formal hearing before the Territorial Land Commission. He's challenging the fraud investigation, claiming the evidence was obtained illegally and demanding it be dismissed. "Can he do that?" Barnett asked from where he'd been mending tack nearby. "He can try, and if he succeeds, the whole investigation collapses." Lila looked at Cole with stricken eyes. "He's going to expose how we got the documents. He'll claim we broke into his office, stole his property, and manufactured evidence. Even if the fraud charges stick, we'll be the ones facing criminal prosecution." Cole absorbed this, his mind already working through implications. "When's the hearing?" 2 weeks. In Clearwater, at the Territorial Courthouse. "Then we've got 2 weeks to build a defense that doesn't require admitting to theft." Cole's voice was steady, though inside he felt the ground shifting beneath them. "We need witnesses who can testify to Crowell's tactics without reference to the stolen documents. We need other victims willing to speak publicly, and we need enough evidence of pattern and practice that the commission has to take it seriously regardless of how the documents were obtained." "Boss, that's a tall order." Jack looked troubled. "Most folks Crowell's crushed are too scared to speak against him. And the ones who might talk don't want to risk retribution. Then we give them reasons to believe speaking up is safer than staying silent. Cole turned to Henry, who'd ridden over that morning with supplies. How many ranchers and business owners in Clearwater have been pressured by Crowell in the last year? Henry considered. At least a dozen I know of personally. Probably twice that if you count the ones who folded quietly. Start making a list. Names, properties, what happened to them. We're going to visit every single one and make a case for why their testimony matters. Cole's jaw set with determination. Crowell's counting on fear and isolation to keep people quiet. We're going to show them they're not alone. Over the next 10 days, Cole and Henry rode a circuit through the territory that felt like assembling pieces of a shattered mirror. Each stop revealed another fragment of Crowell's systematic destruction: the widow who'd lost her late husband's mine to suspicious legal challenges, the Chinese merchant whose supply contracts mysteriously dried up after refusing to sell his land, the rancher whose cattle had died from poisoned water that investigations called accidental, but everyone knew wasn't. Some refused to talk, fear too deeply rooted to overcome with promises of safety. But others, especially after learning they weren't the only victims, began to speak. Quietly at first, testing whether honesty would bring retribution, then with growing anger as they realized the scope of Crowell's manipulation. By the end of the first week, they had 8 people willing to testify. By the end of the second week, they had 14, enough to establish a pattern that couldn't be dismissed as coincidence or isolated grievance. Lila spent those weeks preparing written accounts of her own experiences, documenting Crowell's harassment with the detailed precision of someone who'd been forced to remember every terrible moment. She wrote about the threats to her father's business, the unwanted courtship that became stalking, the way Crowell had used his influence to isolate and control her family. It was painful testimony that left her shaking and exhausted each evening, but she persisted with the grim determination Cole had come to recognize as her defining trait. Daisy seemed to sense the gathering storm. The child grew quieter again, her brief flowering of speech retreating into watchful silence. But she also stayed close to Cole now, not just her mother, following him to the barn in the mornings, sitting nearby while he worked on tack or accounts, asking occasional quiet questions about the horses or the ranch, or whether her mama would be safe. "I promise we're doing everything we can to keep her safe," Cole told her one evening as they fed the horses together, Daisy carefully measuring grain under his supervision. "Mr. Crowell wants to take her away again," Daisy said softly. "I heard Mama and Grandpa talking. They think I don't understand, but I do." Cole knelt beside her, meeting those solemn blue eyes. "Daisy, sometimes grown-ups have to face hard things. Your mama's facing them right now because it's the right thing to do, and because standing up to bullies is how we stop them from hurting more people. But she's not facing them alone. Neither are you. Understand?" Daisy nodded slowly. "Are you going to marry Mama?" The question caught him completely off guard. We haven't discussed. Why do you ask?" "Because married people stay together, and I want you to stay." She said it with the simple directness of childhood, stating facts without artifice. "You make Mama smile, and you're teaching me about horses, and you keep your promises." Cole felt his throat tighten with emotion he hadn't known he was capable of. "I'm planning to stay, Daisy. Whether we get married or not, I'm not going anywhere. This is home now, for all of us. Promise?" "Promise." She smiled then, a real smile, rare and precious, and returned her attention to the horses with the satisfied air of someone who'd gotten the reassurance they needed. The morning of the hearing arrived cold and clear, frost painting the ranch white and breath misting in the pre-dawn darkness. Cole dressed with care, aware that appearance would matter in a formal setting where he'd be judged by men who valued polish over substance. Lila emerged from the cookhouse wearing a dark blue dress that Henry had brought from Clearwater, her hair pinned severely back, her face composed but pale. "Ready?" Cole asked. "No, but I'm going anyway." She managed a tight smile. "That seems to be my approach to most things lately." They rode to Clearwater in a group, Cole, Lila, Henry, and Barnett, who'd insisted on coming as both witness and support. The others stayed behind to watch the ranch and, more importantly, to keep Daisy safe and occupied so she wouldn't spend the day worrying. The territorial courthouse was a 2-story brick building that tried for grandeur and achieved solid competence instead. By the time they arrived, the street outside was already crowded with people. Some there for other business, others clearly drawn by gossip about the hearing, still others identifiable as Crowell's people by their expensive clothes and hostile expressions. Inside, the hearing room was set up with formal precision. A raised platform held 3 chairs for the territorial commissioners who'd preside. Tables faced them for the involved parties, and benches filled the gallery for witnesses and observers. Crowell was already seated at the defense table with Pemberton and 2 other lawyers Cole didn't recognize, looking confident and composed in expensive tailoring. Cole took his seat at the opposing table with Lila beside him, very aware they had no lawyer of their own. Couldn't afford one, really, and had decided that plain speaking might serve them better than legal maneuvering anyway. Henry and Barnett settled in the gallery along with the witnesses they'd assembled, faces set with grim determination. The commissioners entered precisely at 9. 3 territorial officials Cole vaguely recognized from previous business, their expressions professionally neutral. The lead commissioner, a silver-haired man named Morrison, called the hearing to order with efficient formality. This commission has been convened to examine allegations of systematic fraud in territorial land transactions and mining claims, specifically those involving Crowell Mining Consolidated, Morrison announced. Mr. Crowell has petitioned to have the underlying investigation dismissed on grounds that evidence was obtained through illegal means. We'll hear arguments from both parties, examine available testimony, and render a decision on whether the investigation should proceed. Pemberton rose smoothly, launching into a prepared statement about the sanctity of private property and the inadmissibility of stolen documents. He painted Crowell as a victim of criminal conspiracy, suggested that disgruntled former business associates had fabricated evidence, and implied that the entire investigation was motivated by jealousy of Crowell's legitimate success. It was a polished performance that made Cole's teeth grind with frustration, but he forced himself to wait, to let Pemberton talk himself into corners they could exploit later. When the lawyer finally sat, Morrison turned to Cole. Mr. Rourke, you're representing the opposing interest. Do you have a response? Cole stood, feeling every eye in the room on him. Commissioners, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not going to pretend to be one. But I know the difference between legitimate business and systematic theft dressed up in legal language. The evidence this commission has received documents a pattern of fraud, falsified surveys, manufactured legal challenges, and deliberate manipulation of territorial land processes to force property owners into surrendering their rights for below-market value. Evidence obtained illegally, Pemberton interjected. Evidence that corroborates testimony from multiple victims, Cole countered. Commissioners, we've brought 14 witnesses who can testify to experiencing identical tactics from Crowell Mining. They didn't need to see internal documents to know they were being defrauded. They lived it. Morrison's expression sharpened with interest. You have witnesses present? We do. And we request the opportunity to present their testimony so this commission can judge for itself whether there's sufficient evidence of pattern and practice to justify continuing the investigation. The commissioners conferred quietly, then Morrison nodded. We'll hear from your witnesses, Mr. Rourke, but keep it organized and relevant. We're not here for general grievances. Over the next 3 hours, Cole called witness after witness to testify. The widow described how mining surveyors had appeared on her property with documents showing her mineral rights were actually territorial holdings subject to Crowell's claims. The Chinese merchant explained how his supply contracts had vanished within days of refusing to sell land. Crowell wanted for expansion. The rancher detailed how his water source had been contaminated, his complaints ignored by local authorities, and his property eventually seized for failure to maintain viable operations. Each story alone might have been dismissed as bad luck or legitimate dispute, but told consecutively, they revealed an unmistakable pattern. Crowell identified what he wanted, made an initial offer, then systematically destroyed anyone who refused to sell until they had no choice but to surrender. Lila testified last, her voice steady despite visible tension. She described Crowell's pursuit with clinical precision, outlining dates and specific incidents, making clear the progression from unwanted courtship to explicit threats against her family's business. Mr. Crowell told me directly that all the problems my father was experiencing would cease if I agreed to marry him, she stated. He framed it as protection, but it was extortion. Comply with his demands or watch everything we'd built be destroyed. Pemberton tried to object, claiming personal grievance had no bearing on business fraud, but Morrison overruled him. The witness is establishing pattern of behavior. Continue, Miss Hart. When I refused and left Clearwater to work at Red Hollow Ranch, Mr. Crowell escalated, Lila continued. He sent lawyers to pressure Mr. Rourke regarding water rights. He had me arrested on manufactured theft charges. He explicitly offered Mr. Rourke a package deal, water rights, and my forced return to Clearwater in exchange for dropping all legal action. That's not business, commissioners. That's a man using every resource at his disposal to acquire what he wants, regardless of who gets hurt in the process. The room had gone very quiet. Cole watched the commissioners' faces, seeing calculation there, but also something that might have been distaste. When Lila finished and returned to her seat, Morrison called for a recess. The commissioners withdrew to deliberate while the gallery erupted in whispered conversations. Cole caught Crowell's expression across the room, fury barely controlled, jaw tight with rage that promised retribution. That went better than I expected, Barnett murmured, appearing at Cole's elbow. The commissioners were listening, really listening. Doesn't mean they'll rule in our favor, Henry cautioned. Crowell's got influence. He might have already reached them. Then we'll know soon enough, Cole said. The recess lasted 30 minutes. When the commissioners returned, their faces were professionally blank, giving nothing away. Morrison called the room to order and waited for complete silence before speaking. This commission has reviewed the testimony presented today, along with the evidence previously submitted to the Territorial Land Office. Mr. Pemberton's objection regarding the origin of certain documents is noted. However, the testimony we've heard establishes sufficient independent evidence of systematic fraud to justify continuing the investigation, regardless of whether specific internal documents are deemed admissible in future proceedings. Cole felt relief flood through him, but Morrison wasn't finished. Furthermore, the pattern of behavior described by multiple witnesses suggests potential criminal conduct beyond simple business fraud. This commission is referring the matter to the Territorial Attorney's Office for review of potential charges, including extortion, harassment, and abuse of legal process. Morrison's gaze fixed on Crowell with obvious distaste. Mr. Crowell, you're advised to make yourself available for further questioning and to refrain from any contact with the witnesses who testified today. Crowell shot to his feet, his composure finally cracking. This is outrageous. These people have conspired against me, stolen my property, and now they're being rewarded for their crimes while I'm treated like a criminal? Mr. Crowell, you'll restrain yourself or be removed from this hearing, Morrison said coldly. As for criminal charges related to the document theft, that's a separate matter for local law enforcement to pursue if they choose. This commission's concern is territorial land fraud, and the evidence supports continuing that investigation. Our decision is final. He brought his gavel down with decisive force, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent room. Then the commissioners rose and filed out, leaving chaos in their wake. Crowell stood frozen at his table, his lawyers conferring urgently, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. Then his gaze found Lila, and the hatred in his eyes made Cole's blood run cold. "This isn't over," Crowell said, his voice carrying across the room despite the surrounding noise. "You've won nothing, Lila. Nothing." Cole moved to intercept, positioning himself between Crowell and Lila with deliberate intent. "The commissioners ordered you to have no contact with the witnesses. That includes Miss Hart. Walk away, Crowell." "Or what? You'll challenge me? Fight me?" Crowell's laugh was bitter, ugly. "You're nothing, Rourke. A failed ranch owner protecting a woman who isn't worth the trouble. I could destroy you with a word." "Then why haven't you?" Cole kept his voice level, conversational, aware of the crowd watching avidly. "You've had weeks to destroy me. You've had months to destroy Lila's father. But here we all are, still standing, while you're the one facing investigation and potential criminal charges. Maybe you're not as powerful as you think." The truth of it hit Crowell visibly, his expression twisting with impotent fury. Pemberton put a hand on his client's arm, murmuring urgently, trying to extract him before he said something that would make things worse. But Crowell shook him off, taking a step toward Cole with his hands clenched into fists. "You think you've won? You think this hearing changes anything? I own this territory. I own the officials, the courts, the—" "Stop talking." Pemberton's voice cut through Crowell's tirade with urgent force. "Sir, you need to stop talking right now." Because everyone in the room had heard. The remaining commissioner's staff, the court reporter still taking notes, the gallery full of witnesses and observers, all of them had heard Vance Crowell claim to own territorial officials and courts. It was the kind of admission that could transform an investigation into prosecution, that could bring federal attention to territorial corruption, that could destroy a man's empire in ways fraud charges never would. Crowell seemed to realize what he'd done, his face draining of color. He opened his mouth, closed it, then turned and strode from the courtroom with his lawyers scrambling to follow, leaving shocked silence in his wake. Barnett whistled low. Well, that was unexpected. That was a gift, Henry said, moving to embrace Lila, who was shaking with relief and residual fear. Everything he just said will be in the official record. Even if he tries to walk it back, the damage is done. Cole felt the tension that had been coiling in his chest for weeks finally begin to loosen. They hadn't won everything. Crowell was still free, still wealthy, still capable of causing harm, but they'd exposed him publicly, damaged his credibility beyond easy repair, and put him under official scrutiny that would make further attacks on Red Hollow or the Hart family incredibly risky. It wasn't total victory, but it was enough. It was breathing room. The ride back to Red Hollow felt different from the anxious journey that morning. Henry was almost cheerful. Barnett kept chuckling about Crowell's spectacular self-destruction, and even Lila seemed lighter, as if some burden she'd been carrying had finally been set down. "What happens now?" she asked Cole as they rode side by side through the late afternoon light. "Now we go home. We rebuild properly, not just surviving, but actually building something that lasts." Cole glanced at her, seeing hope starting to replace fear in her eyes. Crowell's going to be busy with investigations and trying to salvage his reputation. His investors will be demanding answers. He won't have time or resources to waste on revenge against people who've already beaten him. "You think it's really over?" "I think the worst of it is over. He'll probably keep his distance, focus on damage control. And even if he doesn't, we're not the scared, isolated targets we were 2 months ago. We've got allies, we've got evidence, and we've got each other." Lila's hand found his where it rested on the saddle, her fingers cold but steady. "Thank you for standing with me through this, for not giving up when it would have been easier to walk away. I told you before, walking away was never an option. Not from you, not from Daisy, not from what we're building." Cole squeezed her hand gently. "Besides, I'm starting to think the ranch was never really home until you arrived. It was just land and buildings. You and Daisy made it something worth protecting." Her smile was brilliant, transforming her tired face. "So what are we protecting now? Just a ranch or something bigger?" "Something bigger," Cole said. "A family, maybe, if you're willing." "I'm willing," Lila said softly. "More than willing. Ready, even." They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, the November sun painting the Wyoming landscape in shades of gold and amber, the first stars beginning to appear in the eastern sky. By the time Red Hollow came into view, full dark had fallen, but the cookhouse windows glowed warm and welcoming. Daisy burst out the moment they dismounted, throwing herself at her mother with the desperate relief of a child who'd spent all day worrying. Lila caught her, holding tight, murmuring reassurances while Daisy cried and laughed simultaneously. "It's over, baby! The hearing went well. We're safe." "Mr. Crowell?" Daisy's voice was muffled against her mother's shoulder. "Mr. Crowell is in trouble with the territorial government. He won't be bothering us anymore." Lila pulled back enough to see her daughter's face. "We can stay here. We can build a real home." Daisy looked past her mother to Cole, those serious blue eyes searching his face for confirmation. He nodded. "We're staying," he said simply. "All of us. For as long as we want." The child's smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. She launched herself at Cole next, hugging him with surprising strength for someone so small. He caught her automatically, feeling something in his chest crack open with warmth he hadn't known he was capable of. "Thank you for keeping your promise," Daisy whispered. "Always," Cole promised. "That's what family does." Over the next weeks, Red Hollow settled into rhythms that felt less like survival and more like genuine living. News filtered back from Clearwater through Henry's contacts. Crowell was indeed facing serious investigation. His investors were demanding audits and accountability, and several of his territorial contracts had been suspended pending review. The man who'd seemed untouchable 2 months ago was scrambling to prevent total collapse. Meanwhile, at the ranch, winter preparations took on a different quality. They weren't just weathering another season, but building toward a future that actually seemed possible. Cole hired 2 additional hands to replace work that had been delayed during the Crowell crisis. Lila expanded the cookhouse garden, planning for spring planting with the assumption she'd be there to harvest. Daisy started spending more time with the horses, losing some of her fear, even asking if she could learn to ride properly come spring. Henry split his time between the boarding house and Red Hollow, clearly reluctant to be far from his daughter and granddaughter, but also recognizing their need to build their own life. He and Cole developed an easy partnership, the older man's experience complementing Cole's determination in ways that benefited everyone. One evening in early December, after supper had been cleared and Daisy was asleep in the room she now shared with Lila, Cole found himself alone with Lila in the cookhouse. She was making bread for the next day, her hands moving through the familiar motions while he pretended to review supply lists but was actually just watching her work. "You're staring again," she said without looking up. "I'm appreciating. There's a difference." Lila smiled, still focused on her dough. "Appreciating what, exactly?" "How you've transformed this place. Not just the cookhouse, but the whole ranch. The men are happier, the food's better, and there's laughter instead of just work." Cole set down his pencil. "And how you've transformed me, I guess. Made me remember that isolation isn't the same as strength." Now she did look up, her eyes soft in the lamplight. "You did the same for us. Gave us safety when we desperately needed it. Gave Daisy a place where she could start healing. Gave me hope that maybe trusting someone wouldn't end in betrayal." Cole crossed to where she stood, close enough to see flour dusting her cheek, close enough to feel her warmth. "I've been thinking about what Daisy asked a few weeks ago. About marriage." Lila's hand stilled on the dough. "Oh? I know it's fast, I know we've barely had time to breathe between crises, and I know I'm not good at this. At feelings and words, and all the things that probably should come before proposals." He reached up to brush the flour from her cheek, his touch gentle. "But I also know I don't want to wake up wondering if you'll still be here tomorrow. I want permanence. Partnership. A future we build together intentionally instead of just letting it happen." "Cole, I love you, Lila. I love your daughter. I love what we've become together in the middle of fighting for survival." His voice roughened with emotion. "Marry me. Not because you need protection, or because Daisy needs a father, but because we choose each other, because what we've built deserves the commitment to make it permanent." Lila's eyes filled with tears that she didn't try to hide. "Yes. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I choose you. Yes to all of it." She pulled him down for a kiss that tasted of salt and joy and promise. When they finally broke apart, she was laughing and crying simultaneously. "I love you too. I've been terrified to admit it, terrified that wanting something good would make it disappear. But I'm done letting fear make my choices. So we're really doing this. We're really doing this." Lila's smile was radiant. Building a life, raising Daisy together, turning Red Hollow into a real home. All of it. They told Daisy the next morning over breakfast, both of them nervous about how she'd react to the news that would fundamentally change her life. The child listened to their careful explanation with characteristic seriousness, asked several practical questions about where everyone would sleep and whether she could help plan the wedding, then announced that she'd known they were going to get married all along because people who loved each other always did in the stories her mother told. "Can I be in the wedding?" she asked. "Maybe carry flowers or something?" "You can absolutely carry flowers," Lila assured her. "In fact, you're the most important part of the whole celebration." Daisy beamed, satisfied, and returned to her breakfast with the matter-of-fact acceptance of childhood. Cole and Lila exchanged glances over her head, relief and amusement mingling. "That went well," Cole murmured. "She's been hoping for this since you taught her to feed the horses," Lila whispered back. "We're just catching up to her expectations." They decided on a small ceremony for mid-December, before winter made travel impossible. Word spread through the territory with surprising speed. The ranch cook and the solitary rancher who'd stood up to mining company corruption, finally making their partnership official. People who'd testified at the hearing sent congratulations. Samuel Brennan offered to stand as official witness. Even some of Clearwater's residents who'd been quietly sympathetic but too afraid to speak publicly sent notes of support. The morning of the wedding arrived cold and crystalline, the kind of December day where everything seems etched in sharp relief against brilliant sky. Lila had sewn her own dress, simple ivory wool that complemented her dark hair and practical nature. Daisy wore a matching dress in soft blue, her hair braided with ribbons, her excitement barely contained. The ceremony took place in Red Hollow's main house, which had been transformed by collective effort into something approaching festive. Wildflowers that Jack had somehow convinced to bloom in winter decorated tables. Barnett had organized the chairs borrowed from the church. Tommy had cooked, under Lila's detailed instruction, a wedding supper that smelled like heaven. Henry walked Lila toward where Cole stood waiting, the older man's eyes suspiciously bright as he placed his daughter's hand in Cole's with whispered words about taking care of his girls. Then Daisy stepped forward with her basket of flower petals, scattering them with solemn concentration as if sealing the floor with hope itself. The vows were simple, traditional, spoken in voices that shook slightly with emotion but never wavered in conviction. Cole promised to stand beside Lila through whatever came, to protect and partner with her, to love her daughter as his own. Lila promised the same, partnership over possession, choice over obligation, building together instead of merely surviving side by side. When Samuel Brennan pronounced them married, the room erupted in cheers. Cole kissed his wife. His wife! The concept still seemed impossible, with Daisy giggling beside them and the crew whistling their approval. The celebration that followed was loud and joyful and completely perfect. They ate Tommy's carefully prepared meal, drank toast to happiness and new beginnings, told stories that grew more exaggerated with each retelling. Daisy fell asleep on her grandfather's lap midway through, worn out from excitement, but she was smiling even in sleep. As evening settled in tonight and guests began drifting toward their beds or their rides home, Cole found himself standing on the porch with Lila, watching stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. She leaned against him, warm and solid and real, his wife in fact, and not just desperate hope. "What are you thinking?" she asked quietly. "That 4 months ago I was alone except for ranch hands I paid to stay. That I'd convinced myself isolation was strength and caring was weakness. That I'd built my entire life around surviving without needing anyone." He pulled her closer. "And now I can't imagine waking up without you and Daisy. Can't imagine this ranch without your cookhouse light burning. Can't imagine facing anything without knowing you're beside me. Turns out caring isn't weakness after all. Turns out it's the strongest thing I've ever done." Cole pressed a kiss to her hair. "Thank you for giving me the chance to learn that. Thank you for being brave enough to try." Lila tilted her face up to his. "We're going to be happy, aren't we? Actually, genuinely happy." "We already are," Cole said, "and we're just getting started." Inside, Daisy stirred and called for her mother, her voice sleepy but content. Lila went to her immediately, and Cole followed, the three of them settling into the life they'd chosen together with all its ordinary magic and extraordinary promise. The territorial investigation into Crowell mining continued for months, eventually resulting in fraud charges and forced restructuring that stripped Vance Crowell of most of his power and influence. He left the territory quietly, his empire dismantled, his reputation destroyed by his own arrogance and the courage of people who'd refused to stay silent. Red Hollow Ranch flourished. Cole and Lila expanded operations, adding cattle and improving infrastructure with the confidence that came from building toward a future instead of just surviving each season. Henry eventually sold the boarding house and moved to the ranch permanently, building a small cabin near the main house where he could be close to family while maintaining independence. Daisy thrived, losing her fear gradually, learning to ride and work alongside the ranch hands who treated her like a beloved niece, finding her voice again through the safety of unconditional love. 3 years after that first morning when Lila Hart had stepped off a wagon demanding to inspect the cookhouse before accepting employment, she stood in that same cookhouse with Cole's arms around her waist, watching through the window as Daisy raced her grandfather's mare through the paddock with fearless joy. "She's happy," Lila said softly. "She's brave. Like her mother." Cole rested his chin on her shoulder. "And she's home." We all are. Lila turned in his arms, her smile bright and unguarded. We built something real, didn't we? Out of fear and survival and desperation, we built something beautiful. We built a family, Cole corrected. And yeah, it's pretty beautiful. Outside, Daisy's laughter carried on the November wind, mixing with Henry's deeper chuckle and the low calls of cattle settling for the evening. The cookhouse light burned warm against gathering dusk, a beacon visible for miles across the open range, marking Red Hollow Ranch as a place where the lonely learned to love, the frightened found courage, and broken people discovered that healing was possible when you stopped fighting alone. And inside that light, Cole Rourke, who'd once believed caring was weakness and isolation was strength, held his wife and listened to his daughter's joy and understood at last that the real frontier had never been the land at all. It had always been the courage to open your heart and trust that love wouldn't destroy you. It had always been the choice to stand with people instead of apart from them. It had always been the risk of building something together, knowing it might fail but trying anyway because the trying itself was what made you human. Red Hollow had started as land and water and cattle, the dream of a man who thought survival meant self-sufficiency. But it had become something infinitely more valuable, home for people who'd learned that the strongest foundations weren't built from stone or pride, but from the simple revolutionary act of choosing each other, day after day, through fear and hope and everything in between. And that was worth fighting for. That was worth everything.